Chapter 497. The black horse carriage flew through the eastern city and forced open the Vermilion Bird City gate with 2 waste tokens. It ran along the straight official road to the academy in the south. Inside the carriage, Ning Ke held Sang Sang tightly, his right hand fumbling in the carriage wall and kept gasping. He was in good health, and his breath became longer after cultivating the Great Spirit. He gasped not because of fatigue or hard work, but because he could feel Sang Sang's body getting colder and colder through the thick quilt. Finally, he found the small wine pot he had prepared before. Without any hesitation, he unscrewed the lid with his trembling fingers and handed it to Sang Sang's lips. A strong smell of wine filled the carriage. Sang Sang closed her eyes tightly, and her sparse eyelashes trembled slightly. Her face was pale, and her slightly gray lips were tightly pressed together. She clenched her teeth so hard that the liquor Ning Ke poured from the flagon could not enter her mouth at all. It dripped down from the corner of her lips and wet the bedding. Ning Ke looked at the dripping liquor and her weak face, and his body and mind were occupied by fear. He was so scared that he lowered his head in pain and held her tighter. Sang Sang had not fallen ill for a long time. To be more precise, she had not fallen ill since she left the city of Wei and came to Chang'an. But today she was so sick that it was more terrible than any illness in Ning Ke's memory. So he was very scared and made a decision immediately. He did not carry her to the clinic, but boarded the horse carriage and rushed to the academy in the south of the city. There were no doctors in the academy, but there were teachers and senior brothers in the academy. Ning Ke believed that as long as Sang Sang was still breathing she would be fine. It turned out that Ning Ke's judgment was correct. He ran into the clouds with Sang Sang in his arms and came to the cliff plateau at the back of the mountain of the academy. He shouted towards the lake. His senior brothers and sisters who were still asleep suddenly woke up and came out to greet him. Seventh sister was at the front. She was embroidering a picture of a butterfly cat before going to bed and didn't go to sleep until late at night. There was still an embroidery needle in her hair bun, and her face was still full of tiredness and annoyance for being woken up. When she saw Ning Ke's terrified expression and Sang Sang in his arms, she immediately understood what had happened. The tiredness and anger on her face turned into seriousness. She didn't ask Ning Ke anything. She just looked at Sang Sang's pale face, took out the embroidery needle from her hair bun, and stabbed Sang Sang's neck 4 times as fast as lightning. The needle fell into the wind. Sang Sang grunted softly, still frowning and not waking up. However, the pale color on her face faded a little, and the original light black color reappeared. Senior sister. How is it? Ning Ke looked at seventh sister and asked in a trembling voice. He didn't know that senior sister could also use acupuncture to treat people in addition to tactical arrays and embroidery. But looking at Sang Sang's change, he suddenly had a lot of hope. The chill is attacking the heart. It's a little dangerous. I can only use needles to suppress it for now, said the seventh senior sister. Ning Ke's arrival had awakened everyone by the lake at the back of the mountain of the academy. Eldest brother also appeared in the distance, but his movements were still so slow, as if nothing could make him feel anxious or anxious. The seventh senior sister looked at eldest brother and seemed to think of something. She became a lot more relaxed and shouted, "Senior brother, drag 11th brother from the mountain, but hurry up." Eldest brother was startled and turned back to the forest behind him. The seventh senior sister looked at Ning Ke's anxious expression and comforted him, "It's not a big problem. You take Sang Sang to the straw hut first. Teacher is there and nothing will happen. Just wait for 11th brother." Ning Ke didn't understand the meaning of the senior sister's words. If teacher was willing to help, Sang Sang would naturally be fine. But why did she have to wait for 11th brother? The morning light gradually shrouded the back of the mountain of the academy. It fell on the golden and jade-like grass on the eaves of the straw hut, and then reflected to the forest further away. The meadow surrounded by flowers and trees was bright. Ning Ke, Chin Pippi and others stood outside the straw hut, waiting for the news inside. Since last spring, Sang Sang often went to the back of the mountain of the academy. With her good cooking and quiet temperament, she won everyone's love and pity. At this time, knowing that she was seriously ill, the disciples of the academy couldn't help but be very worried. Tang Xiaotang was so anxious that her eyes even turned red. However, Ning Ke was much calmer than before. Because teacher had already woken up and was in the straw hut at this time. He believed that even if Sang Sang had 1 foot in the underworld, teacher would be able to pull her back. At this moment, Wang Qi walked out of the hut. Ning Ke hurried forward. Wang Qi looked at him and said, "She was born with a weak body and has been suffering from coldness for many years. Every time this disease breaks out, it gets more serious. The longer it stays hidden and suppressed, the more serious the disease will be. I checked her pulse and confirmed that she suffered from a severe cold some time ago. Recently she has been overthinking. That's why she is like this now. Ning Ke asked, will she be okay? Wang Qi said, seventh sister pressed her pulse with golden needles in time. I decocted a medicine for her, and it should be able to slightly reduce the cold. It's not a big deal. Just pay attention to keep warm in the future and don't dare to catch a cold. Hearing this, Ning Ke suddenly relaxed and suddenly felt that his legs were a little weak. Wang Qi suddenly thought of something and looked at him confusedly and asked, youngest brother, Sangsang's disease came from her mother's womb, and it must have broken out many times in the past years. There are no good doctors in the city of Wei, and only a group of quacks in Chang'an. How did you manage to keep her alive until now? When Sangsang was young, Ning Ke often took her to see a doctor. The money that he had painstakingly saved was basically spent on the medicine shop, but it was of no use. Later he found a way to help Sangsang survive until today. Hearing his senior brother's question, he did not dare to hide anything and answered honestly, later, every time Sangsang got sick, I would make her drink a big bag of liquor. Second brother had been standing silently outside the hut without any expression on his face. At this time, when he heard that Ning Ke had been treating Sangsang with liquor all these years, he suddenly frowned and looked extremely unhappy. Wang Qi thought for a moment and nodded, this is indeed a good way. Although the pulse warming with liquor can only temporarily treat the symptoms, it is much cleaner than those rotten medicines. Fortunately, there was such an evaluation, or second brother would never spare Ning Quebec watching Wang Qi's figure disappear in the flowers. Ning Ke only today knew that 11th brother, who loved to talk about the flower addict, turned out to be a divine doctor. Thinking of the flower addict with a head full of petals when he first entered the back mountain, Ning Ke could not help but feel a little worried and asked, is 11th brother reliable? 7th sister said, 11th brother has spent his whole life on flowers and plants. How can he be compared to Lu Qinjia, the flower addict, who only loves the appearance but doesn't know the soul? He can recognize all the flowers and plants in the world, and he is proficient in all kinds of herbal medicine. He is the most reliable doctor. Hearing this, Ning Ke finally felt relieved but not completely. In his opinion, the most reliable person in the world was of course his teacher, and he had to listen to what his teacher had to say. The hut was open on all sides and only a few screens were placed on the platform. There was a big couch inside, which was the residence of the headmaster of academy. At this time, Sangsang was lying on it. Sangsang had woken up for a while, but now she fell asleep again under the effect of the medicine. Tang Xiaotang put the medicine bowl aside and wet the towel with boiling water. She wrung it until it was half wet, and then carefully placed it on her still cold forehead. Then she held her little hand and whispered something. Looking at this scene through the screen, Ning Ke felt very grateful. Then he looked back at the headmaster of academy and asked worriedly, teacher, you see, is she all right? The headmaster of academy got up much earlier than usual today, so he was in a bad mood. However, he thought that Ning Ke's mood must be even worse, so he refrained from scolding him. He held a bowl of lotus seed porridge and blew on it, saying, what can happen? She'll be fine as long as she basks in the sun. These words seemed very irresponsible, but Ning Ke was really relieved. Since the headmaster of academy said that she was fine, then Sangsang must be fine. But, would basking in the sun help? He walked to the headmaster of academy, took the bowl of lotus seed porridge and stirred it carefully with a spoon. He asked with unprecedented respect, teacher, Sangsang's body? Didn't you say that she was fine last time? The headmaster of academy said, she was born with a weak and cold body, and has not received proper treatment for all these years. No one knows how much cold aura has accumulated in her internal organs and bone marrow. Fortunately, she had the lucky chance to become Wei Guangming's disciple, and was able to obtain Wei Guangming's divine light. Naturally, she can suppress the cold aura. As time passes, the divine light in her body will be able to turn the cold aura into nothingness. I told you that she was fine that day, so she is fine. Are you questioning me? After confirming that the lotus seed porridge was cold, Ning Ke respectfully handed it over and said humbly, teacher, your words are a slap in my face. I just don't understand what is going on. The headmaster of academy looked at him and said sarcastically, you have to ask yourself what is going on. She was originally a sickly little girl, but she was brought by your heartless master to fight with Xiaoho. Is Xiaoho so easy to kill? In order to help you, she shone brightly on the cliff that night and used up all the divine light in an instant. The cold aura in her body had been suppressed for many days, and suddenly regained its freedom. Naturally, she would find an opportunity to rebel. I don't know how you bullied her recently, making her lose her composure, which is rarely seen. That's why she is in danger today. Ning Ke was silent, thinking that it was all his fault. But Sang Sang was quiet and even a little dull. Something that could make her lose her composure. Could it be an engagement? Teacher, since she is born with a weak and cold body, how can we get rid of the root cause? The headmaster of academy took a sip of the lotus seed porridge and nodded with satisfaction. He said, as I said before, it is very simple to cure her. Bask in the sun and practice the divine skill. When you master the divine skill, the little girl will recover naturally. Ning Ke thought of the long journey and asked tentatively, it is a long way to the Lank Temple. She is weak now, can I not go? The headmaster of academy was furious and scolded, which family are you from? Can't you walk without the little handmaiden's service? Even if she needs to recuperate, you can go yourself. Besides, the Buddhism sect has its own set of skills. I admire the little monk's medical skills in the Lank Temple. Are you going or not? Ning Ke said helplessly, I'll go. Teacher, why are you so angry? The conversation between the headmaster of academy and Ning Ke had already made the disciples in the hut want to laugh. When they heard Ning Ke's last sentence, they finally could not help but laugh out loud. Eldest brother did not laugh. He looked at Sang Sang on the couch, his face full of worry and pity. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 498. There was a dormitory at the back of the academy's mountain. Sang Sang was seriously ill, so he naturally stayed. It didn't take long for Sang Sang to wake up. Although she was still weak, at least she was not as scary as last night. Ning Ke told jokes and hummed a tune like when they were young to coax her to rest. Seeing that he was really tired, Tang Xiaoteng began to take care of him and asked him to rest outside. It was almost dusk, and the warm sunset shrouded the back of the mountain. Ning Ke walked out of the courtyard and saw Chin Pippi standing by the lake, pretending to be lonely. He was startled and asked, "What's wrong?" Chin Pippi looked at the water grass and the tens of thousands of gold coins on the surface of the lake. His round and cute face was full of loneliness. He said, "I'm a little touched to see you and Sang Sang so close." Ning Ke's heart skipped a beat. He wondered if he and Tang Xiaoteng were quarreling again. He patted his shoulder and comforted him. "Senior brother, you don't have to compare this with me." Chin Pippi explained seriously, "Tang Tang and I are not like what you think." Ning Ke thought that Tang Tang could even call him such a nauseating title. What else was there to explain? He couldn't help mocking, "Don't you think it's the most disgusting thing in the world for a man to deny it?" Chin Pippi turned to look at him and said sincerely, "We are just holding hands." Ning Ke said sarcastically, "She is just a little girl. What do you want to do to her?" Chin Pippi said with slight annoyance, "She is about the same age as Sang Sang." Ning Ke was a little embarrassed and kept silent. The soil by the lake looked like golden Keela under the sunset. Chin Pippi lowered his head and gently turned his heels, leaving a few golden prints on the soles. After a long silence he said, "Tang Tang and I are not like you and Sang Sang. We have not experienced life and death together, nor have we had time to help each other. But we are very close. I feel sorry for her when I see her jump into the waterfall, and I feel happy when I take her to Chang." And Ning Ke didn't want to be a relationship expert, so he asked directly, "What are you trying to say?" Chin Pippi looked up at him and said seriously, "Sang Sang is very sick today. You must be very scared, right?" Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "Yes, I can't imagine life without her." Chin Pippi said, "Me too. I can't imagine the days without Tang Tang by my side, so I've decided to go back to Jishou Abbey." Ning Ke did not know what to say. 2 years ago, when Chin Pippi denied that he was the illegitimate son of the West Hill hierarch, Ning Ke had vaguely guessed this guy's identity. However, he had only confirmed it today. According to the previous context, he wanted to return to the Jishou Abbey to lay his cards on the table about Tang Xiaoteng. Chin Pippi said, "There is a saying among the people that an ugly daughter-in-law has to see her in-laws. My mother died a long time ago, but my father is still alive. Tang Tang is not ugly, but in my father's eyes, people from the devil's doctrine are definitely not good-looking. To solve this problem, I have to go back after all." Ning Ke frowned slightly and said, "Have you ever thought that you might not be able to come back after returning to the Jishou Abbey? What about Tang Xiaoteng?" Chin Pippi looked at him and said sincerely, "Younger brother, you are my best friend in Chang'an City. If I really can't come back, please help me take care of Tang Tang." Ning Ke refused without hesitation and said, Senior brother, don't try to trap me with such words. After all, you have to take care of your little wife by yourself. Don't count on me. Hearing this, Chin Pippi was furious and scolded, how can you be a younger brother? Besides, as long as the headmaster says something, will I really not come back for the rest of my life? Ning Kai thought for a while and said, no matter what, you have to wait for me to come back from the Lang temple. Then we can discuss it. In my opinion, let the headmaster preside over the wedding for you. There is no need to return to the Jisho Abbey. The headmaster of the academy looked very unreliable, but his words were still so reliable. In fact, 11th brother's medicine was really good. At night, Song Song's body temperature returned to normal and she was much more energetic. She leaned on the bed and whispered to Tang Xiaotang. Ning Kai sat by the desk and looked at the first exploration of the Great Spirit in the light of the oil lamp. He always felt a little flustered and could not help but glance at the bed. He looked at Tang Xiaotang's beautiful but childish face and thought of what Chin Pippi had said before. He could not help but feel a little sorry for her. The spring night breeze blew gently and the oil lamp swayed slightly, making his face look a little uncertain. He thought of the strange dream he had last night, Song Song's illness, and what the headmaster had said in the hut during the day. Suddenly he felt a little moved. He asked Tang Xiaotang to take care of Sang Sang and walked out of the small courtyard. After leaving the mirror lake, he passed through the forest, bypassed the waterfall, and walked out of the narrow gorge. He came to the back of the mountain of the academy, between the precipices in front of the sea of clouds. It was already late at night and the surroundings were quiet. Only the roar of the waterfall between the precipices kept echoing. Accompanied by the sound of the waterfall, he walked up the steep stone path. It took him a long time to walk to the cliff cave that had imprisoned him for a whole spring. The roofed corridor built by senior brothers had withstood the wind and rain for a year and was no longer as new as before. The wisteria fruits in the corridor fluttered in the night wind like bells. Ning Kai walked over and saw the headmaster of the academy. The headmaster of the academy sat on the edge of the precipice. In his left hand was a delicate food box with a few pieces of beef. In his right hand was a yellow clay wine pot with clear old wine. He looked at Chang'an City in the distance under the night sky and looked at the lights of tens of thousands of families. No one knew what he was thinking. Ning Kai walked behind the headmaster of the academy and bowed to him. He remembered that night in late spring last year, also on the edge of the precipice, he once had a long conversation with his teacher. The headmaster of the academy knew that it was him behind him and seemed to know what he was thinking. He raised his hand and waved, gesturing for Ning Kai to sit beside him. Then he said, "You can tell me when you want to." Ning Kai wanted to ask the headmaster of the academy many questions. However, looking at the tall figure on the edge of the precipice, he naturally thought of the figure in his dream. So he hesitated for a long time and still did not speak. Living in the Tang Empire was a very happy thing. Living in Chang'an, the capital of the Tang Empire, was the happiest thing. His days in the academy had brought him a happiness that he had never experienced in his life. So he did not know what to say. He was afraid that once he revealed those things, he would lose these happiness. The headmaster of the academy picked up a piece of beef with bright tendons and put it into his mouth. He slowly chewed for a while with an intoxicated expression on his face. When the fragrance of the meat completely melted in his mouth, he praised, "There is wine and meat, a life without worries." After saying this, he picked up the small pot of wine and took a sip. Sitting beside the headmaster of the academy, Ning Kai picked up a piece of beef with his hand and threw it into his mouth. He frowned because he felt that the beef was too bland. However, he soon realized that he was wrong. This seemingly bland and tasteless piece of beef became more and more fragrant in his mouth as he chewed. After the tendons were cut by his teeth, they released a wonderful mixture of elasticity and velvety texture. The unique taste of the beef gradually moistened his mouth and tongue. "Good?" He was extremely shocked and said, "Teacher, this is good wine and meat." The headmaster of the academy took out a small round iron wine pot from the side of the food box and threw it to him. He said with a smile, "Don't try to ask for wine in other ways. This wine is ordinary, but the beef is extremely tasteless. There is a pot and a stove in the cliff building. I can braise the white water beef. The best thing is that Old Yellow can't climb here to top me." Ning Kai knew that the Old Yellow mentioned by the headmaster was the Old Yellow Bull. It was really embarrassing to eat its own kind in front of the bull. Suddenly, he found that the small round wine pot in his hand was a little familiar. He looked carefully and saw that the surface of the wine pot was engraved with flat lines. Wasn't it the small iron pot that he used to blow up Xiaoho? Don't look at me like that. I just think that this small iron pot is more suitable to hold wine. Of course, to prevent the iron from staining the wine, I painted something on the wall of the pot. The headmaster of the academy brought the yellow wine pot to his lips and took a sip. He said, "A knife can be used to kill people, but it can also be used to cut vegetables. It depends on your choice. A person's mouth can be used to eat meat and drink wine, but it can also be used to speak and ask questions. It all depends on your choice. But there is no right or wrong." How could Ning Ke not understand what the headmaster of the academy said? After a moment of silence, he said, "Teacher, I have been having a dream these years. The story in the dream seems to be developing step by step." The headmaster of the academy asked, "Why do you ask me?" Ning Ke said, "Because you are in the dream." The headmaster of the academy said with a smile, "I am not Sang Sang. Why do you have to dream about me?" Ning Ke said angrily, "Teacher, I am talking about these things very seriously. Can you stop joking?" The headmaster of the academy looked at him with a smile and said, "Then continue with your dream." Looking at the headmaster of the academy's eyes, which seemed to be able to see through everything in the world, Ning Ke felt a little nervous. He said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Teacher, you should know about those dreams. Last year, tonight at this cliff, when we talked about the underworld invasion, you once asked me which direction the underworld was in my dream." The headmaster of the academy looked at his youngest student quietly and said, "This question is still valid now." Ning Ke said, "The darkness I saw came from the north." The headmaster of the academy said with a smile, "In that case, it is consistent with what I have learned from my travels over the years." Ning Ke asked, "What is the underworld invasion and the darkness coming? Last year you only talked about these stories and legends, but you did not mention the details." Details? When the whole world is shrouded in darkness, no one can see the details. When the whole civilization is lost, even if there are details, they will not be able to be passed down. The headmaster of the academy looked at the darkness above the cliff and the stars. He said, "It is said that night and day alternated in this world. Sometimes it was light for tens of thousands of years, and sometimes it was darkness for tens of thousands of years. The war between light and darkness ran through the whole history. When Haoyin won, it was the world of light today. When Yama won, it was the underworld invasion. When the underworld invasion, there will be no sun in the day and no stars in the night. The world will become extremely cold. The creatures on the earth can only rely on geothermal heat to keep warm. At that time, volcanoes, hot springs, and the heat flow in the South Sea will become the most precious resources. Countless wars will take place there. The war will not last for too long. Most people will die because of hunger, cold, and desperate killing. You must know that it will be an unimaginably cold and realistic world. And after a few decades, the whole earth will become extremely quiet, as if it will never wake up from a deep sleep. Only the strongest and most determined people, whether humans or beasts, can survive. These cold and dark ages are called the Dharma Ending Age by the Buddhism sect, and the Taoism sect calls them Yama's Advent. The headmaster of the academy said, "And I am used to calling it, the everlasting night." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 499. Ning Ke looked at the steep cliff under his feet and the beautiful waterfall under the starlight. He imagined the countless nights without starlight and could not help but feel a little cold. He looked at the headmaster and said, "If the underworld invasion happened many times in history, the alternation between the everlasting night and the everlasting day had happened many times. However, the human race did not go extinct. It could only mean that, like what you said earlier, some of the strongest and most determined people survived the long night. I just don't understand. Those who could survive the long night must have gone through a natural selection. The remaining people must be the most powerful cultivators. But why don't these people exist in the West Hill scriptures or the stories of the Buddhism sect?" The headmaster said, "You should have seen the stone statues of the venerables in the Wanyan Tower Temple. The venerables of the Buddhism sect are equivalent to the sages recorded in the Haoyin Taoism scriptures. In the legends, these humans have almost infinite lifespans and extremely determined wills. That is why they have successfully survived the everlasting night and waited for the day when Haoyin won again." Ning Ke only learned about these powerful beings that had long been forgotten by the world tonight. He was extremely shocked and said, "These cultivators must be the most powerful humans. But why didn't they survive?" The headmaster said, "Almost infinite is not infinite. They can defeat the night, but they can't defeat the eternal time. Besides, in my opinion, these cultivators are far from being the most powerful. Ning Ke felt that there was something wrong with the headmaster's words. In such a cruel and realistic everlasting night, the ones who could survive should be the most powerful. At this moment, the headmaster suddenly looked at him and asked, "Do you think cultivation is a gift from Haotian to humans?" This question was very sudden and seemed to have nothing to do with the conversation between the headmaster and the disciple. So Ning Ke did not react for a moment. When he understood the question, he suddenly thought of how he inherited the youngest uncle's mantle and joined the devil's way at the front gate of the devil's doctrine. He shook his head and said, "At least not all cultivators." The headmaster looked into Ning Ke's eyes and said slowly, "A real cultivator cultivates his own heart and will eventually cultivate to the absolute self. That is absolute pride. They can hide around volcanoes like the venerables of the Buddhism sect and the sages of Haotian Taoism. They can survive on a small amount of moss and only need water. But how can they accept becoming a shivering mouse in the night? The more powerful the cultivator, the more unwilling they are. So when the everlasting night comes, they do not choose to hide. They choose to fight with Yama and die." Ning Ke knew that the headmaster was right. How could someone like youngest Uncle kneel before Yama's throne or hide in a mouse hole? If the night really came in the future, second brother would definitely be the first to jump out and fight with Yama. Then, as the headmaster said, he would die. Thinking of that scene, thinking of the dark night in his dream, thinking that he might be the son of Yama, he felt that the night wind between the cliffs became colder and colder, and he suddenly had the urge to jump down. But he still had the headmaster, a pot of old wine and some beef beside him. His life was still bright and beautiful, but Sang Sang was still sick. How could he bear to do that? He looked at the flowing clouds between the cliffs and asked blankly, "The hot sea is freezing, and the night in the far north is getting longer. These all indicate that the underworld is about to invade. Teacher, what should we do?" The headmaster held the small yellow clay pot and sighed, "I have been searching for decades in the world, but I still can't find the underworld. How can I know what to do? After all, cultivators compete with time. It's a pity that it's too late for me to see the scene of the last everlasting night." After saying this, he drank a mouthful of wine. His white eyebrows fluttered slightly, and a rare trace of worry appeared in his usually carefree expression. The West Hill Divine Palace is a follower of Haotian. They should know the most about the war between light and darkness. Didn't they make any preparations? Ning Ke asked. Everyone can see the darkness at the end of the road, not to mention the followers of Haotian. The headmaster said, "Although I don't know what happened during the last underworld invasion, I think the followers of Haotian Taoism will fight with Yama with all their might for the glory of Haotian. If they can't defeat Yama, they will hide and save their lives. They will come again when Haotian defeats Yama." Ning Ke said, "It sounds a little weak." The headmaster said, "They have always been weak people." Ning Ke suddenly remembered what Lianxing 32 said when he was talking about the West Hill Divine Palace and the Jisho Abbey among the white bones at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. He said, "The Divine Hall is a group of dogs raised by the Jisho Abbey. So what if it's a shabby abbey? They are still dogs raised by Haotian." "Ah, they are all dogs." The headmaster said, "The Devil's Doctrine appeared 1,000 years ago. The great divine priest of light who founded the Devil's Doctrine never experienced the everlasting night, so there is no way to deal with it in the doctrine of the Devil's Doctrine." Ning Ke said, "I heard that the Devil's Doctrine also worships Yama?" The headmaster said, "It's not faith, it's fear. The people in the Devil's Doctrine need an idol to resist the majesty of Haotian. It's just psychological comfort." Ning Ke thought of what Lotus had said before she died. After a moment of hesitation, he repeated it to the headmaster. "Some people say that the Devil's Doctrine is a moss-covered stone that hides in the dark to avoid Haotian's divine light. They say that they don't respect Haotian, but they are actually very afraid of Haotian. That's why Haotian allows the existence of the Devil's Doctrine." In fact, there was another part of the sentence, but he cut it off. At that time, Lotus said that if Ning Ke picked up the sword left by youngest uncle, he would lose all respect and even fear of Haotian. That was the real Devil's Doctrine, and Haotian would never allow such a person to exist. The headmaster's white eyebrows fluttered and he asked, "Who said that?" Ning Ke answered, "Lianxing 32. The headmaster said, "Although Lotus is perverse and has some mental problems, he is still somewhat knowledgeable. Although it was dangerous for you to meet him, it was also a lucky chance. Although he had some mental problems, he was still somewhat knowledgeable." Ning Ke did not know what to say. He thought that only the headmaster or youngest uncle were qualified to comment so casually on such a talented person like Lotus. The headmaster asked, "What did Lotus say about the Buddhism sect?" Ning Ke said, he said that the Buddhism sect is only deliberately mystifying and is no different from a fortune teller. He also hated the Buddhism sect's emphasis on self-cultivation. When faced with the transfer of fate, they could only wait humbly and could never reach the real nirvana realm. Does the transfer of fate refer to the underworld invasion? It should be. It sounds like Lotus is not only reasonable but also knowledgeable. However, different schools and sects have their own origins. It is not appropriate for me to make such an overbearing comment. The headmaster said, according to the Buddhist scriptures, a long time ago when the Ueluan kingdom was not called Ueluan kingdom, the earliest Buddha knew about life and death. He was sad and confused and did not know how to extricate himself. He also foresaw the underworld invasion and the coming of the night. He was in unspeakable pain and did not know how to extricate himself. He traveled around and practiced self-cultivation. He sat under an osmanthus tree for 100 days and thought about how to extricate himself. He tried to make all living beings escape from death and forget the changes of day and night. Finally, the Buddha figured out a way. Ning Ke asked curiously, what way? The headmaster looked at him and said with a smile, that way is to shut up. Ning Ke thought that he had misheard and repeated subconsciously, shut up? The headmaster said, that's right. The Buddha's way is to teach all living beings to be silent and patient. They should treat everything around them as an illusion, such as wealth, pain, family, and separation. In this way, if they do not find joy in life, they will not feel pain in death. If they do not find joy in light, they will not feel pain in darkness. That's why I call this method shut up. Ning Ke asked confusedly, what's the similarity? The headmaster said, if one does not cry out in pain after being beaten, does it mean that one needs to shut up? Ning Ke was amused and praised, teacher, you are indeed good at summarizing. Suddenly he thought of Daosher monk who had died under his blade in Qinyan, the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect who came to Chang'an on a snowy night. He frowned and said, if the Buddhism sect is really particular about being patient, why are the monks of the White Tower Temple of the Ueluan Kingdom so evil, and why are there people from the Shenkong Temple who set foot in the mortal world? This is the result of the reverse Dharma. Back then, the Buddha figured out a method to shut up and passed it down. The disciples of the Buddhism sect really believed it. In this way, the more stable one's Buddhist heart is, the more determined one will be. So what if the underworld invasion is happening? So what if it is a long night? If they are not even afraid of death, why would they be afraid of darkness? On the other hand, if they are not even afraid of darkness, why would they be afraid of death? The headmaster smiled and said, the Buddhism sect is particular about avoiding the mortal world, but this does not mean that they cannot enter the mortal world. Once they enter the mortal world, they will be even more troublesome than the fanatics of the West Hill Divine Palace. Ning Ke thought of what the headmaster had mentioned and asked curiously, if the Buddha could predict the underworld invasion countless years later, did he not predict the ending? The headmaster said, if the prophecy is useful, why are we still alive? This sentence was very meaningful. However, Ning Ke's mind was filled with the big secrets related to the underworld invasion. How could he let the headmaster of the academy get over it with this profound sentence? He said, teacher, this is not the attitude to tell a story. The headmaster was slightly annoyed and said, if you don't like my story, I will learn Buddhism. Ning Ke was confused and asked, what do you mean? The headmaster said, shut up. Ning Ke said helplessly, don't. The headmaster said, beg me? Ning Ke said without hesitation, teacher, I beg you. I just want to know what the Buddha's prophecy is. The headmaster of the academy suddenly realized that he finally had someone who was as shameless as him. He felt helpless and comforted at the same time. He stroked his beard and said, when the Buddha traveled around, he once went to the Jisho Abbey and was invited by the Abbey Dean to read the 7 tomes of Arcane. He felt the oracle of Haotian and wrote down what he had foreseen on the Ming hand scroll. Later, the great divine priest of light took the Ming hand scroll to the wilderness to establish the devil's doctrine. It had a lot to do with those words. The reason why the Ueluan kingdom was called Ueluan kingdom was also because of the prophecy in the Ming hand scroll. Ning Ke said in surprise, there's a message from Buddha on the Ming hand scroll? The headmaster said, among the 7 scrolls of the tomes of Arcane, the most important is the Tian hand scroll. The most interesting one is the Ming hand scroll. As for the other scrolls, let's not read them. Ning Ke suddenly thought of a possibility and asked, teacher, have you read the 7 volumes of the tomes of Arcane? The headmaster answered matter-of-factly, of course. Let me tell you something serious. Recently there have been cases of accounts being stolen. I have been reporting this to the website. Everyone, please pay more attention to your account security. In Chidian's Security Center, you can use your mobile phone to authenticate, and you can set up consumer protection. There is also a very useful voucher conversion. I have been working on it. I want to make sure that you can only read books in Chidian when you top up your account. That way at least you can't steal the game. Then, tomorrow is Saturday because I have to make up for the previous day's leave, so there will be updates. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 500. Ning Kei's question was not about the tomes of arcane. The Ming Hand Scroll had always been in the academy and the headmaster could read it anytime he wanted, but about the 7 volumes. When Lotus was invited to the Jisho Abbey, he had only read 2 volumes of the tomes of arcane. It was hard for him to imagine that there was someone in the world who had read the 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane. So when he heard the headmaster's answer, he was shocked, speechless. He thought that even if the headmaster was the greatest person in the world, the relationship between Haoyan Taoism and the academy was so bad. How could the Taoists in the Jisho Abbey lend him the 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane? The headmaster knew what he was thinking and said, I like reading. I really wanted to read the contents of the tomes of arcane. I can't just stop reading because the Taoists refused to let me. Ning Kei understood the hidden meaning in the headmaster's words. He gasped and said, Did you break into the Jisho Abbey and force yourself to read the 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane? What's the difference between that and a bandit? The headmaster was a little embarrassed and said, Books are the inheritance of knowledge. They should not be hidden deep in the mountains and not be read by others. How can reading be powerful? The 7 volumes of the tomes of arcane, which were supreme in the eyes of the world, were no different from ordinary books in the academy, especially in the eyes of his headmaster. Since he wanted to read them, he had to read them. Thinking of this, Ning Kei was shocked and proud. Being a Tang was something to be proud of. Being a disciple of the academy was even more so. Youngest uncle's reputation in the world, senior brother's occasional appearances in the mortal world, and especially the anecdotes about the headmaster that were unknown to the world had formed a very special atmosphere. No matter how shy and reserved one would eventually become proud after staying in the atmosphere of the academy for a long time. Moreover, Ning Kei had never been a shy and reserved person. He clicked his tongue in wonder and then remembered the question he wanted to ask. What was the message of the Buddha on the Ming Hand Scroll? The headmaster said, As I said, you will understand when you can understand the book. Ning Kei then remembered that he had read the Ming Hand Scroll. Thinking of the unclear words on the tomes of arcane, such as the rotation of the sun and moon, he vaguely guessed that it was the message of the Buddha. He was even more curious about the prophecy. But how could he understand it at his current state? Whether it was the back of the mountain or the front yard of the academy, the learning atmosphere had always been free and casual. As the saying goes, one should not be ashamed to ask his subordinates. Ning Kei was even more ashamed to ask his superiors. He said directly, Teacher, I really don't understand. Ning Kei was even more ashamed to ask the headmaster. The headmaster sighed and said, Teacher, I really don't understand. Ning Kei looked at his teacher's fluttering white eyebrows and was at a loss. He thought to himself, how could there be a language in this world that you don't understand? You're not an ordinary person. When the day enters, the night comes and the moon appears. The headmaster looked at the sky full of stars above the precipice and said, The first sentence refers to the Dharma ending age mentioned by the Buddhism sect. The arrival of night means the underworld invasion. But what is moon? The Yueluan kingdom got its name from this. The moon must be a rotating object. You said a few words last year tonight, but who has seen it? He turned to look at Ning Kei and said, The reason why I don't understand is because it is a prophecy. As I said before, if prophecies are useful, why are we still alive? Since we will live according to our own will, the prophecy may not come true. Since it may not come true, it may never appear in our world. Since it will never appear, how can we understand it? This sentence was a little hard to pronounce, but Ning Kei heard it clearly. He roughly understood his teacher's attitude towards the Ming Hand Scroll. After thinking for a moment, he asked, Since the prophecy of the Buddhism sect is not important, why should I go to the Lank Temple? The headmaster asked, What is the Lank Temple most famous for? You should be a monk? Ning Kei thought about it in his heart, but he knew that he would be scolded by his teacher if he were to say such an answer. Suddenly, he recalled the rumors about Prince Long Qing before he entered Chang'an, and thought about the important junctures in Master Lotus' life. He asked in disbelief, Is it the debate? He had answered seriously and cautiously, but he did not expect that his answer would still make the headmaster extremely dissatisfied. The headmaster said angrily, "You talk and I'll talk. That's just a group of cultivators talking about love. They're just a bunch of cultivators messing around and fooling around with those mysterious scholars and Taoist priests. It's all Lotus and the little monk from the Lank Temple's fault for starting such a bad trend." Ning Ke asked, "What is the Lank Temple most famous for?" The headmaster said, "What is written on the invitation card? The Lank Temple is most famous for the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival." Ning Ke said unhappily, "Even if the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival is famous, what does it have to do with me?" The headmaster said, "The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival is the Ghost Festival. It started countless years ago and originated from the legend of the underworld invasion. The most important part of it is to worship the ghosts. In the beginning, it was a ceremony for the human world to beg the underworld to come later. In other words, it was to send a message to the underworld, telling them to live a good life there and not to think about the human world." Ning Ke was shocked when he realized that the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival was related to the legend of the underworld. The headmaster continued, "The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival was originally a festival of Haotian Taoism. I don't know why. Maybe the believers of Haotian Taoism felt that it was embarrassing for them to do such a thing, so it gradually evolved into a Taoist field with incense and Buddha's voice. However, as time passed, most people forgot the origin of this festival." Ning Ke said, "If the underworld really wants to invade, how can they be sent away with just a few nice words? Besides, I think if the underworld really exists, the people there won't like to eat incense and candles." The headmaster slapped his thigh heavily and said, "Yes. Why do we need to cultivate if nice words work? That is why I have been thinking that the Taoist and Buddhist sects created this Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival to use the light of Buddha to suppress the underworld. People would only slap their thighs when they were talking excitedly." The headmaster was also excited at this time. However, he thought that the action of slapping his thigh looked a little indecent and did not match his image of a high mountain. Therefore he did not slap his own thigh, but slapped Ning Ke's thigh heavily. Feeling the burning pain from his thigh, Ning Ke's expression suddenly changed. He opened his mouth, but before he could cry out in pain, he heard the second half of his teacher's words and suddenly forgot the pain. "Suppress the underworld. Is the entrance to the underworld in the Lank Temple?" The headmaster did not notice his expression at all and said, "Countless Buddhist temples in the world have the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival, not just the Lank Temple. Moreover, I have been there many years ago and did not find any entrance to the underworld. You can go and look for it again this time. Maybe it will answer some of your questions." The headmaster spoke calmly and casually, but Ning Ke was shocked. Thinking of the words "suppress the underworld" made him feel uncomfortable all over. His skin itched terribly as if some black smoke was about to seep out of his pores. The Buddhism sect was now suspecting that he was the son of Yama. If he went to the Lank Temple to participate in the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival, wouldn't he be suppressed by the light of Buddha? Would he be suppressed under the mountain for 500 years? There was a light mountain breeze between the cliffs, and the wisteria fruits hanging in the rain corridors swayed with the wind. They were shaped like copper bells, but there was no clear sound. Only a few light popping sounds could be heard as the ripe fruits fell to the ground and burst into juice. The unique fragrance of the wisteria, which was a mixture of fat and fresh, immediately filled the air. Ning Ke thought for a long time and plucked up his courage to ask, "Teacher, what is the son of Yama?" The headmaster looked at the night clouds in front of the master and disciple and said, "According to the records of the Shenkong Temple's Book of Light and the Ming Hand Scroll, Yama has 70,000 children. Every time the day and night alternates and before the underworld invasion, a son of Yama will come to the human world to foretell and guide the coming of the night." "God," Ning Ke repeated in surprise. The headmaster said, "Of course the coming of the night needs guidance, just like the light needs guidance. Of course all these years I have been thinking whether it is guidance or projection." Ning Ke lowered his head again and kept silent for a long time. It was not until the night grew darker and the starlight became dimmer and the night clouds between the cliffs became as black as ink that he said, "Teacher, if I am really the son of Yama, will you kill me?" The headmaster looked at him and smiled. He said matter-of-factly again, "Of course." Ning Ke raised his head and looked at him. His eyes were full of innocence and begging, like a kitten that had just opened its eyes and was extremely pitiful because of hunger and fear of the strange world. "Everyone's life is unique. Even if all the lives in the world are added up, they are only as unique as my life. Teacher, you can't take it too hard." The headmaster looked at him and said seriously, To exchange one's life for the safety of billions of people in the world, this is what a hero and a saint should do. If that day really comes, I hope you can kill yourself. Ning Ke naturally disagreed and said indignantly, I have said that eldest brother is a benevolent person and second brother is a man of ideals. I'm just a selfish person. I don't even want to be a man of ideals, let alone a saint. Teacher, you have gone too far by using such words to provoke me. The headmaster suddenly laughed out loud. Hearing the laughter, Ning Ke was a little helpless. The headmaster looked at him and said with admiration, Not bad, not bad. Since you are a human, you should be a human. Why do you have to be a saint? You have thought it through. In my opinion, since you can think it right, I believe you will not do anything wrong in the future. I'm very pleased, ha. In the night, the hearty and even arrogant laughter echoed between the cliffs and gradually disappeared. Ning Ke was still extremely helpless and did not know what to say. The headmaster looked at him and said with a smile, The son of Yama needs to be defined, but it cannot be defined by humans. Only you can define it. Just like how humans are humans because we believe that we are humans. Only we can define humans, not Hao Yen or other beings. Ning Ke smiled bitterly and said, Teacher, what you said makes sense. I'm not flattering you. I really think it makes sense. But only you are qualified to say this. The headmaster said, I did not say this. It was your youngest uncle who said it. Go for the massage. Have a good weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 501. So it was Little Ant Master's words. Ning Ke looked at the faintest light in Chang and city in the distance. After a long silence he asked, Teacher, do we really have to go to the Lank Temple? The headmaster said, It's up to you. But if you don't go, no one will be able to answer your doubts, not even me. And I always feel that this trip to the Lank Temple is your lucky chance. Ning Ke asked, What kind of lucky chance? I'm not a person who believes in destiny. The headmaster said, However, after seeing many things over the years, I gradually feel that my views are too stubborn. I have some new understandings. Fortuitous encounters are not something that is destined to happen by the heavenly Tao. Instead, some people living in this world, because of the ideals in their hearts, even a single thought will begin to affect the environment and people around them. In the end, it will affect the other party who is extremely far away. Until you meet them, the thoughts in your mind will turn into actual stories. Then, you will go back to the beginning of the story, and you will often find that what you want in the end is what you want. This is probably fate. The headmaster continued, Sang Sang might be able to recover on her own, but it would be better if she could take a look at the little monk in the Lank Temple. You have inherited your youngest uncle's legacy, so you still need to learn some Buddhist Dharma to dilute the hostility. You have to figure out if you are the son of Yama, and you should go and see what the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival is all about. It is your lucky chance that you need to do all this. Ning Ke said absent-mindedly, It sounds like what the monks say, but I don't understand. The headmaster said, You'll understand if you listen more to the monks. Will it be dangerous? You'll get hit by a carriage while walking. Teacher, I'll take your words as a tacit agreement. Since when did I recognize him? Ning Ke withdrew his gaze from Chang and then looked down at his knees. He said, If even you think it's dangerous, what about me and Sang Sang? The headmaster smiled and said, Without simmering it for 3 days and 3 nights, how can the Buddha jumps over the wall be achieved? If you don't. Ning Ke raised his hands and begged for mercy. He said painfully, I've heard what youngest uncle said so many times. Teacher, you don't have to say it again. The headmaster said, Let's go and take a look. We won't know until we see. Ning Ke sighed and said, The world is so wonderful. The headmaster said in surprise, I didn't expect you to receive it so well. What's good about it? There's a rhyme. I just feel bored. It was still windy tonight and the cliffs were very gentle. However, Ning Ke was not in a relaxed mood. He asked with a gloomy expression, Teacher, you are a man of great ability. Can't you see the future? The headmaster said, The end of cultivation is time. Even though I have lived longer than ordinary people, I am not old enough to experience the last underworld invasion. I did not see what happened before the everlasting night. It is probably because of this that I cannot fully understand the Ming hand scroll. I do not know how this story will develop. Now that you are a character in this story, I do not know what changes will happen to you in the future. But I hope it will be good. Ning Ke asked, Are there still people in this world who experienced the last underworld invasion? In the past, he did not believe that cultivators could live for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. However, as he entered the back of the mountain of the academy and became more knowledgeable, he began to wonder if there was such a thing as immortality in the world. The headmaster said, "I know 2 people who experienced the last everlasting night." Ning Ke did not expect that there would be such people. He asked in surprise, "What kind of people?" The headmaster seemed to have thought of something, and his expression became a little complicated. He said indifferently, "A drunkard and a butcher. But they do not care about the affairs of the world. I am afraid they are not people." Ning Ke once again thought of the strange dreams he had. In one of his dreams, a drunkard and a butcher appeared. They stood beside him and stared at him. In another dream, the headmaster snatched the wine bag from the drunkard's hand and drank a mouthful. Then he snatched a pig's hind leg from the butcher's back and took a bite. Could the headmaster be talking about those 2 people? Ning Ke was shocked and said, "Teacher, do you really not want to hear my dream?" The headmaster looked at him and said with a smile, "Do you still not understand? That is your own dream after all." At this point, Ning Ke finally understood what the headmaster meant. Any story needed to be advanced in order to know the future development. Any scene had to be seen with one's own eyes in order to know what color it was. Whether one was the son of Yama or what would happen in the future, one had to walk in the story and then choose. In other words, one was the author. The headmaster floated away. Only Ning Ke was left on the dark cliff. Looking at the night sky and the flowing clouds, he thought of what Master Lotus said to him before he died and frowned. "You have joined the devil. If you want to cultivate the devil, you must first cultivate the Buddha. Then please walk bravely into the night. Although you have no chance of success and may die as soon as you start on the road, I still wish you well and curse you." He silently repeated these words, then stood up and waved his hand at the darkness that occupied his entire field of vision, saying, "If you really are the Netherworld King, if I really am your son, then please remember that when teacher can't protect me, you must protect me a little." In the West Hill on the lush spring peach mountain, the black divine hall of judgment exuded a cold and murderous aura. The hall was extremely spacious. Hundreds of priests in red robes and deacons in black kneeled on the smooth and flat ground, looking like a red flower in the dark night on the ground. The priests and deacons had been kneeling for a long time and their knees were already aching. But no one dared to get up or even look up. They looked down at their own reflections on the smooth floor of the divine hall and saw the humble expressions on their faces. Even they could not understand why they were so humble. A deep fear from the bottom of their hearts made their bodies stiff. As a result, the red flower in the dark night on the ground became a little rustling. Instead of feeling beautiful, it could only make people feel cold and bloody. For countless years, the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace had been like this. People in the judicial department dealt with horrible punishments all day long and believed in the principle that the strong would always be strong. So no one was unfamiliar with this atmosphere. The divine hall of judgment did not change much. It was still empty and cold. The blood-like seat of heavenly black jade was still there. But the bead curtain in front of the seat of heavenly black jade had been broken into bead powder in the battle a few days ago and could no longer be repaired. In the end, it was swept into the garbage by the handyman and disappeared. The bead curtain had been in the divine hall of judgment for many years and added a lot of mysterious and horrible aura to the powerful man on the seat of heavenly black jade. People were used to the existence of the bead curtain. Now they had to get used to the bead curtain because the powerful man on the seat of heavenly black jade was dead. Now sitting on the seat of heavenly black jade was a young and beautiful girl. Of course, in the eyes of the subordinates of the judicial department, the girl's body now had some kind of divinity. Because they could not look at her directly, they did not have the concept of beauty in the secular world. She represented power and horror. After a long time, Yi Hongyu sat on the seat of heavenly black jade with her hands supporting her chin. She remained silent and expressionless. She was extremely calm, which made her look extremely cold. When she did not speak, the entire divine hall of judgment did not dare to make any sound. All the divine priests and deacons knelt on the ground and did not dare to look up. They did not even dare to guess what was going on. Some timid people clenched their teeth in fear and found that the sound was so clear that they almost fainted. Yi Hongyu looked at the people who knelt respectfully in front of the seat of heavenly black jade and listened to their nervous and frightened breathing. She recalled what she had seen and experienced over the years. There was a faint sense of mockery and disgust in her beautiful eyes. She even felt a little tired. A divine priest walked in from the side of the divine hall and bowed respectfully in front of the seat of heavenly black jade. Yi Hongyu waved her hand in annoyance. The divine priest opened the thick dossier and looked at the people who knelt in fear in front of the seat of heavenly black jade. He said expressionlessly, "The merciful and majestic Haotian has guided people out of the dark wilderness. The apostles with sharp swords have broken the ice in the ancient river and stand in front of the bonfire to announce to the people, like the change of dynasties in the secular world, the inheritance of the great divine priest of judgment would always set off a storm of blood." As the indifferent voice of the divine priest sounded, 14 red-robed divine priests and deacons in black were dragged out of the divine hall of judgment. There were sounds of axes chopping and cries from time to time outside the hall. These 14 divine priests and deacons were the staunch supporters of the former great divine priest of judgment. Some of them had to die. They might have to live to continue to contribute to the West Hill Divine Palace. The dead should be rejoiced because the living would spend the rest of their lives regretting their foolishness when the Tao addict lost her power. The divine priest's voice echoed in the empty divine hall of judgment. As the names were called out one by one, the subordinates of the judicial department who knelt on the ground became more and more frightened. No one knew if their name would be called. Only the commanders of cavalrymen of divine hall in black and gold armor who knelt in the middle seemed relatively calm. The commanders of cavalrymen of divine hall were directly under the jurisdiction of the judicial department. But after the death of Prince Longqing 2 years ago, the power of personnel and punishment of cavalrymen of divine hall was transferred from the hierarch lord to the commander of the divine guards, Luo Kadi. And these commanders believed that although they were not respectful to the current great divine priest of judgment, they were not those powerless divine priests who only knew how to read scriptures. They were powerhouses in the see-through state. The judicial department was very realistic. As long as one had enough power, he could redeem the corresponding sins and be qualified to continue living. After all, the West Hill Divine Palace ruled the world by executors like them. However, what no one in the temple expected was that the priest's gaze finally landed on the gorgeous black and gold armor of these cavalry commanders. He then slowly read out their names. Zmo Yuanjun Lu Xiao. Hearing their names, the commanders of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall could not suppress their fear and bewilderment. They raised their heads and looked at the seat of heavenly black jade one after another. However, they found that the girl sitting on the seat of heavenly black jade was supporting her chin with her hands and eyes closed, as if she had fallen asleep. The cavalry commander named Zmo was the most qualified and the most powerful among them. He looked at his colleagues who were frightened but did not know what to do. He shook his head and slowly stood up, patted his knees, looked at the girl on the throne and asked slowly, "Why? If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 502. Other than the broken bead curtain that day, the Divine Hall of Judgment had been free of dust for many years. Of course, that did not include the fine sand in the depths of the stone cracks, which could only be forced out by the horrible aura of the seat of heavenly black jade. But at least kneeling on the ground for a while would not touch any dirt. That was why Commander Zmo stood up and patted his knees. He did not really want to get rid of any dust. He just wanted to express his contempt for the girl on the seat of heavenly black jade to regain his confidence, so that he would not be crushed by the majesty of the seat of heavenly black jade again. There were 10 teams of cavalrymen from the Divine Hall of West Hill. Each team had a commander. Commander Zmo had long entered the upper state of see-through and was as famous as Chinbachi. Of course, he knew that he was no match for Yi Hongyu. But he had to stand up because he did not want to die. Yi Hongyu blinked and slowly opened her eyes. She looked at the man in front of the seat of heavenly black jade without any expression on her face. Before she could speak, she frowned and coughed painfully. A maidservant nervously walked to the seat of heavenly black jade and handed her a silk handkerchief that was as white as snow. Yi Hongyu took the handkerchief and gently wiped her lips. 2 red plum blossoms appeared on the white handkerchief. Everyone in the Divine Hall of West Hill knew that Yi Hongyu was seriously injured, including these powerful commanders. But even though the judicial department had always followed the law of the jungle, no one dared to take advantage of her injury because no one had the confidence. When Yi Hongyu broke the bead curtain and killed the former great divine priest of judgment, everyone in the Divine Hall thought that she would take over the position of great divine priest of judgment. But to everyone's surprise, after closing her eyes and resting for a moment, she walked down from the seat of heavenly black jade and walked towards the white divine temple at the highest point of Peach Mountain. Under the astonished gazes of countless people, she severely injured Luo Kadi, the commander of the divine guards, with 1 strike. If not for the hierarch's order, she would have killed that person. Few people in the world could kill the great divine priest of judgment and then the commander of the divine guards. Even if they could do it, they probably wouldn't dare to do it. Logically speaking, even if Yi Hongyu broke through to the knowing destiny state, she wouldn't be able to do it. But she dared to do it and actually succeeded. The image of the indigo robe flying on the Peach Mountain would forever remain in the memory of everyone in the Divine Hall. That battle had completely established the status of the indigo robe girl in the Divine Hall. From that day on, no one in the Divine Hall of Judgment would dare to challenge Her Majesty. ZMO did not dare to be picky, even if he saw her coughing up blood and knew that she was seriously injured at this time. After defeating the terrifying Great Divine Priest of Judgment and the powerful Commander Luo Kadi, the girl on the throne did not die and only suffered some injuries. This definitely did not mean that she was weak, it only meant that she was indescribably powerful. Yi Hongyu held her chin and looked at him quietly. She said softly, "Kneel." At this time, the priests and deacons who were still kneeling on the ground of the Divine Hall couldn't help but look at each other when they heard these two words. They naturally remembered the scene when the great divine priest walked into the Divine Hall that day, and recalled that they had once enthusiastically shouted for him to kneel down, and their expressions suddenly became extremely strange. The divine priests and deacons understood the fear and thoughts in each other's eyes. They raised their heads and pointed to the only standing commander ZMO. They shouted angrily, "Kneel? Kneel? Kneel?" Hundreds of people shouted in unison, their voices rumbling like thunder, echoing in the empty Divine Hall of Judgment. Their expressions were so angry that their spittle flew everywhere. Their voices were a little hoarse and their facial features were distorted. They looked like a group of fanatical lunatics. Yi Hongyu looked at them calmly. She was a little satisfied and a little tired. Zimo's face became paler and paler, and his body became stiffer and stiffer. He couldn't even maintain his balance and swayed like a weak patient. Hearing the thunderous scolding coming from beside him, Zimo looked at his colleagues who were usually gentle and even flattering but now had become so cold and angry. "What?" He asked the question again, but he was not as calm as before. He even deliberately had a trace of disrespect, and his eyes were full of a pitiful look. The divine priest closed the thick file and looked at Zimo and the cavalry commanders who were kneeling on the ground and begging for mercy. He scolded them coldly, "How dare you? You are the generals of the Divine Hall, but you have fallen so low. The great divine priest thought that you have made some small contributions to the judicial department and showed mercy. He did not take your bodies, but only stripped you of your duties and cultivation and demoted you to commoners. You are not grateful for God's grace, but how dare you talk here? If they were not stripped of their bodies, they would not be beheaded." However, as the cavalry commanders of the West Hill Divine Hall, ZMO and the others had helped the judicial department hunt down the remnants of the devil's doctrine and search for heresy. They had done many things and many people wanted them dead. If they were really stripped of their cultivation and chased out of Peach Mountain, they would lose the protection of the West Hill Divine Hall. What kind of miserable ending would they face? Hearing this, Zimo's body shook even more and he almost fell to the ground. He looked at the girl on the throne and shouted in horror, "Only Commander Luo has the authority to punish us. Great Divine Priest, you have overstepped your authority. Aren't you worried that the Hierarch Lord will be angry?" Yi Hongyu slowly sat up and looked at him expressionlessly. She said, "Commander Luo Kadi is now sick in bed, so the Hierarch Lord has returned your authority to me." Luo Kadi, the commander of the West Hill Divine Hall Divine Guards, was a grand cultivator who had entered the knowing destiny state many years ago. How could such a person be sick? Everyone knew that the real reason Commander Luo Kadi was sick in bed was not because of illness, but because he was seriously injured by Yi Hongyu. Thinking of this, the people of the judicial department felt a chill in their hearts. The thunderous scolding in the Divine Hall gradually disappeared. Zimo's face became paler and paler. He stood there in a daze and said in a hoarse voice, "Great Divine Priest, please tell us what sins we have committed." The Divine Priest looked serious and was about to scold him again. At this moment Yi Hongyu raised her hand. The Divine Priest immediately shut up and humbly retreated to the side of the seat of heavenly black jade. Yi Hongyu quietly looked at ZMO and the cavalry commanders for a long time. There was dead silence in the Divine Hall of Judgment. Yi Hongyu suddenly smiled and said calmly, "You know very well that all sins are fake. The reason why I want to expel you from the Divine Hall is very simple. It is because you once looked at me in that way, so I don't want to see you again." ZMO suddenly understood. Last spring Yi Hongyu was weak because she had fallen into a lower realm. The whole divine hall was rumored that Commander Luo Kadi had obtained the approval of the hierarch lord and was ready to propose marriage to her. Under such circumstances, the cavalry commanders led by Chinbachi gradually looked at her differently. Some of them showed greed like Chinbachi, some showed pity as if they were admiring a weak beauty, and some looked at her as if she were their sister-in-law. There was no hostility in these gazes and not all of them were malicious. However, when those gazes fell on the great divine priest of judgment, then they all deserved to die. Zemo was desperate. He looked down at the smooth floor of the divine hall and said with a faint smile, "We have made so many contributions to the divine hall. Do we have to die just because we looked at her a few more times? We deserve to die just because we looked at her a few more times." Yi Hongyu said with a smile, "If you had not made some contributions to the judicial department, do you think I would let you leave Peach Mountain alive?" Zemo looked at her on the seat of heavenly black jade and said in a trembling voice with the last glimmer of hope, "Great divine priest, we are still of some use. Our cultivation can still help the divine hall. No, help you do something. It is a pity that we are crippled like this. Please give us a chance to atone for our crimes." Yi Hongyu was a little tired. She rested her chin on her hand and said, "I have said that you are not guilty. How can you atone for your crimes? I just don't want to see you." The priest walked forward again and looked at the cavalry commanders. He said calmly, "You will receive your punishment later. Great divine priest has compassion on you and has specially given you an old horse to plow the fields and 100 taels of silver to settle down." Inside the divine hall of judgment, hundreds of people knelt on the ground, trembling. No one dared to obey. Zemo slowly clenched his fists, and the commanders beside him could not help but look up. Yi Hongyu did not even look at them. The priest looked at them as if he did not see their emotional changes. He continued to say expressionlessly, "In the future, if you step into the West Hill Divine Kingdom, you will die. If you dare to mention that you have served the Divine Hall, you will die. If you hold a grudge and speak nonsense, you will die." Zemo looked around. It was silent. After the commanders heard the cruel verdict, they did not dare to look him in the eye. After a long time, the struggling expression on his face turned into a strong self-mockery. He sighed sadly and slowly knelt on the ground, accepting the cruel punishment in pain and speechlessness. The side of the divine hall of judgment lit up with a holy and cold light. Zemo's painful and angry beast-like howls and the cavalry commander's painful cries rose one after another. They had worked hard for half of their lives and finally entered the see-through realm. They had become real powerhouses. But today their cultivation was destroyed, and they became ordinary people who were even worse than ordinary people. Gradually, the black divine hall of judgment became calm and even colder and scarier. The empty divine hall was so quiet that it did not seem to belong to the human world. Yi Hongyu sat on the blood-colored seat of heavenly black jade, looking calm. The seat of heavenly black jade was very big, and it should not be comfortable to sit on it. But she was very comfortable sitting on it. The trusted priest knelt in front of the seat of heavenly black jade and advised in a low voice, "Great divine priest, Zemo and the others are indeed very powerful. And from their previous performance, you can look forward to their loyalty to you. It would be a pity to cripple them and expel them from the divine hall." And Commander Luo, Yi Hongyu slightly lowered her head on the seat of heavenly black jade. She rested her chin on her hand as if she had fallen asleep. "Luo Kadi is just a loser. One day I will kill him. Since that is the case, why should I care about his feelings? And no one can see that the world is changing. It will change into a world that many people are unfamiliar with. In that world, even grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state can be killed at any time. Any idea of relying on cultivators in the see-through state is so ridiculous." In the late spring of the 16th year of the Tianqi era of the Tang Empire and the 3447th year of the Great Rule of West Hill, 7 commanders of the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall were destroyed by the new Great Divine Priest of Judgment, Yi Hongyu, and were expelled from the Divine Hall. They were forbidden to step into the West Hill Divine Kingdom again. These once glorious commanders led an old and skinny horse, with 100 taels of silver in their pockets, and walked down the Peach Mountain with their squires like stray dogs. In the records of the West Hill Divine Palace, the crimes of these 7 cavalrymen were very vague. There was only one word: depravity. Therefore they had a shameful nickname, Fallen Knights. And people in the West Hill Divine Palace knew very well that the reason why these cavalrymen were so severely punished was because they took an extra glance at the girl in the crowd last spring. It's really painful to save manuscripts. Please vote for me on Monday to relieve my pain. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 503. Trash. Scum. Get out. In the depths of the West Hill, in the cliffs covered by green vines, hoarse curses full of resentment and violence were heard. The curses were sharp and unpleasant, like sharp swords that could pierce through countless layers of armor. For some reason they were tightly sealed around the cliffs and did not leak to the outside world. The green vines suddenly became chaotic. A figure flew out from the deep cave and fell heavily on the stone platform. It was a young man in an old Taoist robe. After a long time he finally woke up and struggled to get up. He held the green vines on the cliff and coughed painfully. Blood spattered from his lips and soon dyed the front of his Taoist robe red. He looked extremely miserable and pitiful. The Taoist was Long Qing. He grabbed the green vines and rested for a while. After confirming that his injury was not serious, he walked to the edge of the cliff, picked up the bucket and the box, and continued to walk to the caves above the cliff. There was no fear or resentment in his calm eyes. He did not even look back at the deep cave. These days he climbed the cliff covered with green vines every day and dealt with the seriously injured old Taoists in the caves. He deeply felt the violent and horrible temper of these abnormal people. After being humiliated so many times, he naturally became numb. After being injured so many times, he became more and more aware of the huge gap between him and the old Taoist. There was no resentment or revenge. Although the disabled old Taoists in the caves did not have a good face to Long Qing and could order him around, they knew that if they wanted to know the news of the human world in time and keep in touch with the outside world, they could not kill Long Qing directly. Therefore they still had a sense of propriety. They made Long Qing suffer but did not affect his action. However, there were many caves in the cliff and there were many disabled old Taoists. Everyone thought that they had a sense of propriety, but when they came together, no one knew where their propriety went. Long Qing's injuries in each cave were not serious, but after so many days in so many caves, his injuries were getting worse by the day. Because of his injury, Long Qing moved much slower. It was almost dusk when he finished the day's work and returned to the Taoist temple. The warm and red setting sun shone on the simple Taoist temple from the other end of the West Hill Mountains. He stood in front of the hut by the lake and looked at the beautiful scenery without any expression on his face. The middle-aged Taoist walked slowly to his side and looked at the surface of the lake in the twilight. He did not explain to him the identity of the old Taoists in the caves, but said indifferently, "The more beautiful a place is, the fewer people there are." Long Qing bowed to the middle-aged Taoist and asked, "Uncle Master, are there always so few people in the monastery?" From the South Sea to the Jishou Abbey, Long Qing did not see anyone other than the three martial uncles. The simple and beautiful Taoist temple was shrouded in silence. 10 years ago, when Pippi and the little girl were still here, the monastery was much livelier. But then everyone left, and Yi Su only came back occasionally, so the monastery inevitably became a little lonely. The middle-aged Taoist said, "But I heard that the little girl has inherited the position of the great divine priest of judgment, and the great divine priest of light and the great divine priest of revelation will probably be replaced. Then the monastery will be lively for a few days." The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace, the three great divine priests, the nation master of Tang, and people like Master Yen Sei all needed to be baptized by Haotian in the Jishou Abbey before they could be awarded the position of great divine priest. Long Qing knew this story, but he could not help but feel a little lost when he thought that Yi Hongyu had already reached this step. The Holy Land in the hearts of the disciples of Haotian Taoism, the legendary unknown place in the cultivation world, turns out to be such a simple and even boring Taoist temple. Is it a little different from what you imagined? Long Qing shook his head and said, "Since it is unknown, we can't imagine it. We can only know by seeing it with our own eyes. No, even if we live here we may not know." The middle-aged Taoist looked at him with a smile and said, "It's good that you can understand this. The Jishou Abbey is a place outside the world, so it can be simple, quiet, and even lonely. If you really think that the Jishou Abbey you see is the Jishou Abbey, then you are stupid. The Taoists living in that mountain are the Jishou Abbey. The West Hill Divine Palace is the Jishou Abbey. The Abbey Dean is the Jishou Abbey, you and I are the Jishou Abbey, and the whole Haotian Taoism is the Jishou Abbey. As long as the light of Haotian shines, it is the Jishou Abbey. Before you came to the Jishou Abbey, you were already in the Jishou Abbey." The middle-aged Taoist's words seemed a little profound, but Long Qing at least understood the first sentence. The disabled old Taoist priests living in the cave were unknown in the world, but their cultivation states were extremely terrifying. Some of them had obviously surpassed the 5 states and become the legendary sage in the scriptures. Such a Jisho Abbey was indeed a great place that was hard to imagine. I know very well how bad the temperament of the old guys living in the cave is. Since you are injured, you don't need to bear it. Although it is good for your temperament, it will damage your Taoist body and eventually become an obstacle to your future cultivation. Later you can go to the pharmacy to make some medicine. The middle-aged Taoist looked at him and said. Long Qing seemed to inadvertently think of something and asked, "Uncle, when I was tidying up the medicine warehouse a few days ago, I saw a medicine tripod. I wonder if I can use it?" The middle-aged Taoist's eyes revealed an expression of appreciation and said, "It seems that you have learned something from cultivating the shot hand scroll. Your mind is not confused by the complicated cultivation methods, and you can even notice the medicine refining method recorded in the corner. Maybe this is your blessing. If you want to use the medicine tripod, just use it and wash it clean afterwards." The medicine warehouse of the Jisho Abbey was not located by the lake, but on the cliff to the west. It was a 2-story Taoist temple building with complicated talisman characters carved between the pillars and painted with gorgeous patterns. It gave off a sense of nobility and looked more like the main hall of a Taoist temple compared to the huts worshipping the 7 tomes of arcane by the lake. In front of the Hall of Medicine was a large meadow slope. Below the slope was a precipice. The precipice was so deep that even apes and monkeys could not climb it, let alone ordinary people. Even if the world's amazing grand cultivators could climb this precipice, they would be instantly killed by the array hidden in the meadow. Long Qing looked at the meadow that seemed to be burning in the twilight and felt the faintly discernible power of the array. After a moment of silence, he turned and walked to the Hall of Medicine. He held a big old iron ring in his hand, on which there were many seemingly ordinary keys. Without these keys, it was impossible for him to enter the Hall of Medicine. The door of the Hall of Medicine slowly opened, revealing a vast space that did not match the appearance of the hall at all. Several rows of array racks stretched into the depths of the hall. It seemed to be a few miles away with no end in sight. There were countless rare medicines and raw materials placed on the array racks. Each medicine and material had a corresponding array to provide suitable ventilation and a warm and humid environment. These medicines and materials were rarely seen in the world. Many of them were even marked as missing in the West Hill scriptures. If they were to enter the world, it would probably attract countless cultivators to fight for them. However, there were too many kinds of rare medicines and materials here, but they seemed so ordinary. They were casually placed on the array racks and seemed to have been there for many years, with no one paying attention to them for many years. It was hard to imagine, but it was easy to understand. Whether it was the emperor of the South Jin Kingdom or the monarch of the Kingdom of Song, they had to bow before the West Hill Divine Palace. No matter if they were poor or rich, they had to offer their wealth to the West Hill Divine Palace. This meant that all the wealth and resources in the world belonged to the West Hill Divine Palace. In the words of Master Lotus, the West Hill Divine Palace was a group of dogs raised by the Jisho Abbey. The West Hill Divine Palace plundered all the wealth and resources in the world. Other than maintaining the rule of Haotian Taoism over the world, the most precious things were naturally sent to the Jisho Abbey. From this point of view, what the middle-aged Taoist said earlier was right. The world that was enveloped by the light of Haotian belonged to the Jisho Abbey, except for the country called Tang. Long Qing had been in charge of cleaning up the entire Jisho Abbey these days. He also had to come to the Hall of Medicine every day to pick out the medicines that the terrifying old Taoist in the cave needed. He was already very familiar with this place, so he was not as shocked as he was when he first entered. He carried the key and walked into the depths of the hall, not even glancing at the medicines on both sides. Anyone could develop such a state of mind after living in the mountains of gold and seas of jade. However, when Long Qing walked to the deepest part of the Hall of Medicine and walked to the hollowed-out sandalwood door, his expression became solemn. Behind the hollowed-out sandalwood door was the most important place in the Hall of Medicine, where some of the most precious materials and medicines were stored. He had never entered before because he did not have the key to this door. The medicine tripod that Long Qing needed was right outside the door. He had seen it once through the wooden door a few days ago. Today he asked tentatively and did not expect to receive permission from the uncle. He found the simplest key on the big iron ring and inserted it into the lock. There was a slight click and the sandalwood door slowly opened. Long Qing walked in and began to look for the medicinal materials he needed. Most of the materials for the medicine he was going to make were in the main hall. Only 2 of the most important materials should be stored here. Therefore he was very cautious and even a little nervous. The medicine he was going to make was called the Earth-Sitting Pill in the Shahan Scroll of the Tomes of the Arcane. In addition to curing the injuries left by the old Taoist priest these days, more importantly, it could stabilize his ocean of qi and mountain of snow that had been forcibly repaired by the Abbey Dean. In other words, this kind of pill could make his cultivation go more smoothly. A pill with such an effect was, of course, extremely precious. In the records of the West Hill, it was even described as the supreme elixir that could heal the dead. Long Qing had never imagined that one day he would have the opportunity to make such an elixir. Therefore, his nervousness at this time was understandable. All of a sudden, the nervousness on Long Qing's face was replaced by shock. He did not find the medicinal materials needed to make the earth-sitting pill. But among those bottles and jars, he saw a crystal-clear small porcelain bottle made of unknown materials. There was a very faint smell of medicine coming from the small porcelain bottle. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 504. The Lank Temple was far away in the southeast. It was a long journey and no one was willing to make time too tight. Therefore, even though the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival was held in autumn, most of the tourists and diplomatic corps of the Tang Empire who were preparing to participate in the festival chose to set off in early summer. The Academy was the first to receive the invitation from the Lank Temple and sent Ning Ke as their representative. Sang Sang, who had recovered, followed him as well. Their departure time was today. Other than the eldest brother who had to travel with the headmaster of the Academy, the disciples of the back mountain of the Academy rarely appeared in the world. These idiots would only feel happy if they stayed in their own world. For them, the back mountain was big enough, and there was no need for them to stir up trouble in the mortal world. Based on this belief, they did not envy their youngest brother who needed to cultivate in the mortal world. Instead, they sympathized with him. Therefore, when Ning Ke set off, just like when he went to the wilderness 2 years ago, all the senior brothers and sisters came to see him off and gave him small gifts to comfort him. Fourth brother and sixth brother often designed and made good things for Ning Ke, so they did not give him anything special this time. It was just an inconspicuous box. Ninth brother Beigong and 10th brother Shimin were still the most careless. They stood by the lake and played a farewell song as a gift. Listening to the sad sound of the flute and zither, Ning Ke snatched back half of the seal wort from the big black horse's mouth. He looked at his 2 senior brothers who were beaming with joy and said angrily, "Is this a farewell or a funeral? Can you not be so unreliable?" The big black horse was also very angry at this time, but no one cared about it. The big white goose was swimming slowly in the mirror lake, pretending to be deep. The little white wolf was half squatting beside Tang Xiaodong's legs, listening to her and Sang Sang's conversation. It tilted its head slightly as if it understood something. When the song was over, Beigong Weiyang came forward and took out a thin piece of paper from his bosom. He reluctantly handed it over and said, "Little brother, this is the Bailing Sanka score that the world thought was lost. It's extremely precious. You can't give me another unreliable one." Ning Ke wondered why he wanted a score. Tang Xiaotang, the saintess of the diabolism's doctrine, called him youngest uncle. Would he meet the saintess on his journey? But then he thought that if the score was really precious, it could be sold for a lot of money. He took it without hesitation. A score is not a score? Reliable, reliable. Do you know what reliable means? Relying is a term used in chess, so the word reliable refers to the chess records. The 5th brother walked proudly to the center of the crowd, bringing with him an endless sour smell. It was unknown how many days he had not taken a bath. The 7th sister could not help but frown and nag a few words, but he did not care. The Lank Temple is not a dragon's pool or a tiger's den. It is not worth playing such a sad song. Even if it is sad, it is still a joke. However, that shabby temple is famous for the chess world. The monks in the temple are really good at chess. 8th brother, who had always been indifferent to worldly affairs, looked at Ning Ke with unprecedented determination and said, "8th brother and I have been practicing hard in the academy. Those monks were lucky enough to be invited to the Lank Temple. Youngest brother, you must not tarnish the reputation of the academy in chess and embarrass me on this trip." As soon as he finished speaking, 8th brother came over with a thick pile of chess records in his arms. He looked at Ning Ke and earnestly said, "Youngest brother, you've seen us play dozens of games. Even if we are stupid, our state should be much higher than those monks. It's just that you're too lazy, so your basic skills are not good. These are the chess records carefully made by 2 senior brothers. You can practice more on the way. Ning Ke was already stunned. He thought, where is this? At this moment, 5th brother snatched the chess records from 8th brother's arms and scolded him sternly, stupid. What is the use of these chess records for youngest brother? Ning Ke was overjoyed. He nodded and said, yes, yes. However, he did not expect that 5th brother would turn around and give the thick pile of chess records to Sang Sang. Sang Sang's understanding of chess is far better than youngest brother's. 5th brother looked at Sang Sang and said pleasantly, Sang Sang, the important task of maintaining the Academy's #1 chess player in the world will be handed over to you. The Academy was in the southern suburbs of Chang'an, so they did not have to worry about the city gate being closed. Therefore, in order to avoid the summer heat, Ning Ke and Sang Sang did not leave until the sun was setting and night was falling. Looking at the black horse carriage gradually disappearing into the clouds on the mountainside, 2nd brother frowned slightly. He felt that the atmosphere today was a little strange, as if there were some hidden things that he could not see clearly. Eldest brother watched the black horse carriage leave. After a moment of silence, he turned and left. The twilight shone on his old cotton-padded jacket, and some dust could be seen faintly. It seemed that his cotton sleeves were trembling slightly. 2nd brother looked back at eldest brother's back on the mountain road. He was slightly moved and chased after him. Eldest brother walked very slowly, but for some reason, it was difficult for 2nd brother to catch up. When eldest brother walked to the hut, the sun was about to set. The night shrouded the valley, and stars appeared one after another in the dark sky. The headmaster of the academy stood outside the hut, half bent and squinting at a cylindrical iron object. He did not know what was in the iron cylinder. Eldest brother walked behind the headmaster of the academy and asked, Teacher, what are you looking at? I'm looking at the stars. Well, I should say stargazing. It's more elegant. The headmaster of the academy motioned him to come over and said, This is made by 6th brother and 13th brother as a gift to me. They named it Stargazing Mirror. I tried it before and the stars are still the same, but it can magnify the scenery in the distance. I think it's better to use a telescope. Eldest brother put his eyes in front of the iron cylinder and found that, as the teacher said, the stars in the iron cylinder did not become bigger. But if he looked at the mountains in the distance under the starlight, they would be clearly magnified. It's really interesting. Youngest brother really knows a lot of things. He said with a smile, but his smile was a little worried. The headmaster of the academy looked up at the stars in the night sky and said, There may be people who are born with knowledge in the world, but there are no omniscient people. No matter how much your youngest brother knows, there are always many things he doesn't understand. It's the same for me. It's said that the 7 volumes of arcane tomes were formed by Hao Yan's will. When I was still a green-robed scholar like you, I could understand the other 6 volumes. Now I'm old, but I still can't understand the words left by the monk on the Ming hand scroll. Eldest brother said sincerely, I can't understand it either. Nonsense. If I can't understand it, how can you understand it? The headmaster of the academy looked at him and said with a smile, But since you can't understand it, don't worry about it day and night. Eldest brother said, I have to worry about it. The headmaster of the academy looked at him and said sternly, If this is a story, no one knows how it will develop. You don't know, I don't know, and the world doesn't know. Then why do you think that the story will end like that? Everyone in the back of the mountain of the academy knew that no matter how cute Chin Pippi pretended to be, and no matter how Ning Ke interjected, the headmaster's favorite disciple was always eldest brother. The headmaster rarely criticized eldest brother, and he had never reprimanded him so severely. After a long silence, eldest brother said, If there is no worry about tomorrow, there will be worry about today. The headmaster of the academy said, One should worry about today, not tomorrow. Eldest brother said, If the headmaster is not worried about the future of the world, why did he let youngest brother go to the Lank temple? The headmaster of the academy looked at the forest shrouded in silver light and listened to the faint sound of the waterfall in the distance. He said, The night your youngest brother killed Xiaoho, I found out that Sang Sang's illness was more serious than I thought. If I really used the Westhill divine skills to cure it, I'm afraid that there would be problems in the end. I let him take her to the Lank temple to see if the Buddhism sect could cure her illness. Eldest brother said sadly, What if the illness can't be cured? The headmaster of the academy turned to look at him and said, If the illness can't be cured, your youngest brother will be very sad. So even if there is only a glimmer of hope, we have to work 100 times harder. Moreover, she shouldn't have gotten sick. What about Hao Yin Taoism? Eldest brother said, Sang Sang is the successor of the divine priest of light of the West Hill Divine Palace. If Hao Yin Taoism knew that she was seriously ill, they would definitely be worried. They should have their own ways to cure her. The headmaster of the academy looked at his favorite disciple and suddenly laughed mockingly. He said, cure and save? If Hao Yin Taoism knew how to cure and save people, why would I be so distressed now? Sometimes I think that when we cure and save people, we may only cure and save our own illness. Eldest brother was thoughtful. The headmaster of the academy said seriously, you love everyone in the world, so you can't only love one person. But your youngest brother is different. He doesn't love anyone in the world but only one person. So after killing Xiahou, he will be happy for the rest of his life. No one knows how far he can go in the future. But you have to bear the pain of struggling to make a choice. If you can't see through this pain, then your gains will be limited. There was silence. After a long time, a clean and gentle smile appeared on eldest brother's face again. He said, Teacher, I'm willing to keep worrying like this. Because if I don't worry, I won't be me. The headmaster of the academy looked at him and said with admiration, I was wrong. Your love for the world is not related to any education or stereotypes. It is purely from your heart. How can this limit your future? As for me, I'm still the wild grass swaying on the wall. I always want to move with the wind, but now I don't know where the wind comes from. I don't know what your youngest brother will encounter, but I believe that if he doesn't walk, then he will encounter nothing. As long as he walks, then he will meet the future. When he meets it, it will be the day when we meet the real future. Then we can think about what to do. The headmaster of the academy said with emotion, It's a pity that the guy who wanted to quarrel with me for 3 days and 3 nights for a bowl of braised pork is already dead. Otherwise, I would like to ask him what he would do. It was unknown when second brother came to the hut. He had been standing quietly by the side, listening to the conversation between the headmaster and eldest brother. Until now, he finally couldn't help saying, Teacher, although I don't understand what you and eldest brother are talking about, I think I can guess what youngest uncle will do. The headmaster of the academy's expression changed slightly. He stroked his beard and asked, What will your youngest uncle do? Second brother said matter-of-factly, Fight? The headmaster of the academy found that these disciples were becoming more and more like him. They said everything matter-of-factly, but where was the reason? He asked in confusion, Fight who? Second brother was also confused. After a while he said seriously, No matter who. I'm also going out. Greetings to everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 505. The headmaster was furious and scolded, How did I teach such an unreasonable guy like you? Second brother was stunned. He thought that he had always been the headmaster's disciple and everyone knew that he was the most reasonable person. Why did the headmaster say that he was unreasonable? Although Wengguo was not happy, he reflected on himself first. He bowed deeply and asked, Master, last time when we talked about revenge in front of the cliff cave, you asked me to tell eldest brother that he must be resolute and decisive. Did I misunderstand? The headmaster said angrily, Your eldest brother is gentle and benevolent, so he needs you as a mirror to learn how to be more direct. But you are too direct, so I have always taught you to be more cautious. But now, you don't even understand what's going on, yet you want to fight and kill. You only have the bravery of youngest uncle, but you don't have the courage of youngest uncle. Alright, he indeed doesn't have anything else worth praising, but you and your youngest uncle, other than being braver than me, what else can you do? Second brother was very particular about filial piety. Facing the headmaster's stern scolding, he should not defend himself. Even if he wanted to respect the reason, he should wait until the headmaster's anger subsided. But when he heard the headmaster mention his most respected youngest uncle, he did not know how to defend himself. Headmaster, I remember what youngest uncle said to me and senior brother when we were young. If we only have courage left, then courage is all we have. The headmaster was stunned and suddenly laughed. He waved his sleeves and said, That's reasonable. In fact, I also said this to your youngest brother. If the night really comes, we can just fight back. Why do we need to think so much? The eldest brother thought of the words youngest uncle left behind when he left the back of the mountain on the black donkey. He did not smile like his teacher and younger brother, but became more and more worried. He said, Since we are going to resist, why don't we make some preparations before the night comes? The headmaster stopped smiling and said, because we don't know where the wind comes from and where the night comes from. Then everything we do in advance may be wrong. Of course, I hope all our guesses are wrong and the night doesn't come. Eldest brother looked up at the sky and sighed. If the night comes, the light should be the most important. Why does Hao Yin have no reaction? I really don't understand what the heavens are thinking. The headmaster looked up at the dark sky and said, "Look, it's what I said before. There is no omniscient person in the world. I don't know what the sky is thinking. It has been proving this for countless years, so at least we know that it is unknowable." Billions of people in the world had long forgotten the origin of the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival. The underworld still existed in their legends and childhood stories, but it had long become a real legend or story. No one believed that the underworld really existed, and no one believed in the nonsense of the underworld invasion. In the eyes of the people, the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival was an important festival to worship ancestors and feed ghosts. The orchid pots placed along the streets, the young girls dressed in traditional clothes, all kinds of tempting food, and the custom of lanterns made the festival not tainted with the slightest bit of gloomy and ghostly aura. Instead, it was full of beautiful and charming images. The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival at the Lank Temple was naturally a grand event in the cultivation world. The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival itself was also a grand event in the world. Other than cultivators, there were also countless tourists, pilgrims, and official delegations from various countries. They set off from different cities and headed towards the Lank Temple. The Tang Empire also sent a delegation according to the old custom. The level of the delegation was very high. To everyone's surprise, the envoy who represented His Majesty to tour the world was the Jinshi general Xian Zhilong. The Jinshi general was one of the 4 royal generals of the Tang Empire. After Xiaoho's death, his status became even more important. General Xian Zhilong himself was also a legendary figure. His martial arts cultivation state was extremely ordinary, but he had made many military achievements with his exquisite battlefield command. He had been continuously promoted until today. In the military of the Tang Empire, which revered military force, 3 of the 4 generals were experts at the peak of martial arts. Xian Zhilong's individual force was so weak, but he could stand shoulder to shoulder with the other 3. Just from this point, it could be imagined that he had an amazing ability in intelligence or other aspects. Such a figure was definitely qualified to represent the Tang Empire to tour the world. However, the envoy was usually a civil official. Even if His Majesty wanted to show enough respect to the Buddhism sect, it would be enough to send a noble civil official with a title. Why would he send a general? Therefore, this appointment still caused a great controversy in Chang'an and aroused great doubts in the South Jin Kingdom. Who knew if the general would look at the scenery or the city defense along the way? Who knew if the warlike Tang Empire wanted to start a new war? In the end, people confirmed from some gossip that the reason why His Majesty sent Xian Zhilong was mainly because of the following reasons. After Xiaoho's death, the position of Marshal of the Northeast Border Military, which he had once held, was still vacant. The Yueluan Kingdom in the west of the Tang Empire was no longer a threat, so Xian Zhilong wanted to be transferred to Tiang City. Everyone knew that Her Highness in the princess's mansion had been trying to win over the great general of the West in recent years. This news directly caused the Empress to be furious. In order to appease his wife's anger, His Majesty had to temporarily put aside the transfer order. In order to appease his daughter and the important general of the country, he simply sent General Xian to the Lank Temple to relax. His Majesty's actions were close to fooling around. He was completely treating the affairs of the country as a family matter, which made people not know whether to laugh or cry. However, it also made many men who were troubled by family matters feel a lot of sympathy, and it also made those young girls who yearned for love feel even more admiration. Accompanying the envoy to the Lank Temple was the dance troupe of the House of Red Sleeves. 30 years ago, after the former emperor of the Tang Empire forcibly summoned the House of Red Sleeves from the South Jin Kingdom to Chang'an, the daughters of the House of Red Sleeves only went to the Lank Temple to participate in the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival once. Since then they had never left Chang'an. After more than 20 years, the House of Red Sleeves went out again and attracted a lot of attention. All eyes were on the official envoy of the Tang Empire. No one noticed that about a dozen miles behind the envoy, there was a black horse carriage traveling alone on the official road. The wall of the black horse carriage was engraved with complicated and indescribable lines that looked like heavy brocade. Looking at the cold reflection, it seemed to be made of iron and should be extremely heavy. However, the strange thing was that the black horse that was pulling the carriage was leisurely. The carriage traveled on the official road silently, as if it was as light as a feather. The great general of the Tang Empire, the East and the West. Why are all the Tang Empire's generals in the West? I wonder when there will be a Zheng Guanxi. Come to think of it, you don't know who Zheng Guanxi is. In the carriage, Ning Ke leaned on the soft couch and said with a satisfied expression, "This black horse carriage was a magnificent legacy left to him by his master, Yen Sei. It looked ordinary and cold, even a little stiff, but the carriage was very spacious and the equipment was extremely luxurious and comfortable. The carriage was made of stainless steel and was extremely heavy. In the beginning, when he did not have the ability to activate the talisman lines engraved on the carriage, the big black horse was in great pain. When the wheels ran over the carriage, the earth cracked. The wheels were also made of steel, but they did not have any effect on the shock absorption. It was extremely uncomfortable for him, so he rarely sat in this carriage. Now, as he cultivated, his great spirit became stronger and his state gradually improved. Especially after the guidance of Seventh Sister, he finally understood that the lines on the carriage wall were not pure talismans, but a kind of compound talisman array. After mastering the talisman array on the carriage wall, the faint aura of heaven and earth lingered around the black horse carriage and produced some kind of buoyancy. The heavy black horse carriage became a feather floating in the water. No matter how hard the wheels worked, the people sitting in the carriage would not feel the bumps. The painful journey suddenly became a pleasure. However, although the talisman array on the carriage wall was permanent and could summon the aura of heaven and earth in nature, it also needed the aura of heaven and earth to maintain the talisman array. If Ning Ke did not want to die of exhaustion of his psyche power, he had to put a gem in the array eye of the carriage every once in a while. This kind of gem, which contained a relatively high concentration of the qi of heaven and earth, was extremely precious. It was hard to find even in the jewelry shops in Chang'an. Now, the black horse carriage could travel so easily on the long journey because he had gone to the Imperial Center Administration and the Southern Gate Temple to cheat and rob a box of gems. The black horse carriage was very luxurious, and the amount of gems it consumed made it even more luxurious. If he was not Mr. 13 of the Academy, and if he did not have the resources provided by the entire Tang Empire, it would be impossible for him to do so. Ning Ke understood this. When he represented the Academy to enter the human realm, his senior brother had also told him this. Therefore, although he did not want to care about these things in the imperial court, he had to care. Xian Zhilang is a very interesting person, he said. Sang Sang closed her eyes and softly hummed. Her body had basically recovered. The reason why she closed her eyes and hummed so softly was that she felt so comfortable that she did not want to open her eyes, let alone speak. Ning Ke and sixth brother had opened a skylight on the roof of the horse carriage. The blazing summer sun penetrated through the skylight and sprinkled on her body, warming her up all the way. The black horse carriage was made of stainless steel. No matter the color or the material, it was the best to absorb heat. However, perhaps because of the cold aura in Sang Sang's body, the horse carriage still seemed so cool after being exposed to the scorching sun for a long time. It did not feel stuffy at all. Ning Ke did not feel hot at all. Sang Sang's cold little feet were always in his arms. It was very comfortable, as if he was holding two little jade fish that had been frozen for a few days. He moved Sang Sang's little feet a little and reached out to pick up a delicate small porcelain pot on the low table beside him. He took a sip of the delightfully fragrant tea and turned to look out of the window. He saw the farmland on both sides of the official road outside the window. Some farmers were painting their homes, some willows were swaying in the wind, and some naked children were playing in the paddy fields. These scenes always made people feel happy and happy. Ning Ke looked at those naked, dark-skinned, naughty children and felt that he had seen them somewhere before. Then he realized that as long as he walked in the territory of the Tang Empire, it would be easy to see similar scenes, because happiness was always similar. He looked at Sang Sang's dark little face and smiled, thinking that this long journey was actually not bad even if there was no end. At this moment, the big black horse seemed to feel his thoughts and happily neighed. Homology in progress. I'm also on my journey today. I know it's not fun to read one chapter a day, but if I can keep updating and try not to open the skylight, I'm really working hard. I strongly recommend a novel to everyone to fill our lonely days. The novel is called Grand Master of Dreams. I don't know the author. This is not an advertisement. I'm just a reader who likes reading this book. The word homology comes from this book. This novel has no 3 views and now it seems to have no bottom line. I like it. It's very good. I seriously recommend it to everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 506. The black horse carriage tailed the convoy of the diplomatic corps. When they were about to reach a county, there were more buildings on both sides of the official road. Ning Kai still liked the scenery of the countryside, so he let the big black horse get off the official road and onto the slightly narrow but still smooth county road. Anyway, he was confident that he would not lose the diplomatic corps in front of him. The countryside scenery on both sides of the county road was even more beautiful, with some primitive and simple flavor. After traveling for a long time, they looked at the village in front of them and the black horse carriage stopped under a big tree outside the village. The big tree was unknown, but the area of the canopy was huge with lush green leaves. It was like a big umbrella, blocking the blazing sun and casting a shadow. Ning Kai untied the big black horse and let it play on its own. He walked under the big green tree and touched the thick bark, with a happy smile on his face. His fellow disciples of the academy did not like to leave the mountain, because they cared more about their own spiritual realm. Pure spiritual happiness was enough to make them feel fulfilled, but he was different. He had lived in Min Mountain since he was a child, and the forest was like home to him. Moreover, he had been used to wandering since he was a child, so he did not like to stay in one place for a long time. He had stood in the forest countless times and looked at the distant villages with smoke coming out of the chimneys, and carried Sang Sang away silently because of fear. It was probably because of this that he was extremely fascinated by the scenery of the villages. That year before returning to Chang'an, he chose to hold Sang Sang's hand and walk through the fields and villages because of this mentality. At this time he chose a remote county road and stopped outside the village because of this mentality. Sang Sang got off the horse carriage and looked at him shyly. She said, "I fell asleep earlier." Ning Kai said, "It's so comfortable. I want to have a good sleep too." Obviously, Sang Sang had not adapted to the change of her role. She was used to thinking that she was still a little handmaiden. It was really inappropriate for her to just fall asleep like that. In order to make up for this mistake, she tried to remember the last sentence she heard before falling asleep and asked, "How is it interesting?" Ning Kai was stunned for a moment before he realized that she was answering his question from 2 hours ago. He could not help but want to laugh. Looking at her serious expression, he did not want to discourage her, so he answered, "Before leaving Chang'an, Chin 7 came to talk to me. He said that General Xian had been in the Fish Dragon gang for a period of time in his early years and had a good relationship with Cao Xiaoshu. The early years mentioned here were even before Chi 4 and the others. But I don't know why Cao Xiaoshu still lived in Spring Breeze Pavilion after General Xian became a general." "You mean there is something wrong with this person?" Sang Sang asked. Only Ning Kai could understand Sang Sang's words. When she said there was something wrong with a person, she did not mean that this person should be suspected or had something to be vigilant about, but that this person was not good. Ning Kai shook his head and said, "Even if there is something wrong with him, it is the arrangement of His Majesty. Even if he is really determined to get the northeast border military as the rumors in Chang'an City say, it only shows that he has the pride, confidence and ambition that a soldier should have. The emperor is not in a hurry, and the eunuch is not in a hurry, let alone us." Sang Sang said, "I heard that Her Majesty is very unhappy." Ning Kai said, "Don't forget that His Majesty is also my teacher's student, which means that he is my senior brother. He is a really wise person. How could such a person really treat national affairs as a family affair? He is just taking advantage of Her Majesty's anger to warn some people." Sang Sang asked curiously, "Who?" In fact, she was not curious about these things. So she opened her eyes wide and pretended to be curious, which was very deliberate, very childish and very cute. So Ning Kai kissed her on her little face. Sang Sang was a little shy, but she did not avoid it. She did not avoid it, not because she was flustered and helpless, but because she thought it was natural for her to be kissed by Ning Quebec. "So kiss him if you want." Looking at the little girl's bright eyes, Ning Kai was a little flustered. He coughed twice and continued, "Of course it is to suppress General Xian. No, to be more precise, His Majesty is warning his daughter not to get too deep into the army." "What? Is His Majesty going to pass the throne to Her Majesty's son?" Sang Sang asked curiously. This time she was really curious because Liu was one of her few friends in Chang'an City, and also because she knew that this matter had something to do with Ning Quebec. Ning Kai said, "I don't know. Anyway, this matter has nothing to do with us." Even if he said it had nothing to do with them, it still had something to do with them. Otherwise, why would he think about these problems? Just like the girls from the House of Red Sleeves in the diplomatic corps dozens of miles away, it was also a problem that he had to consider. Mistress Jian did not ask him to take care of those girls along the way. But with his relationship with the House of Red Sleeves, if something really happened, he could not stand by and do nothing. In addition to their relationship, more importantly, the academy had the responsibility to take care of the House of Red Sleeves. The girl named Xiao Xiao 30 years ago was the fiancée of youngest uncle and almost became their youngest aunt. She was Mistress Jian's biological sister. More than 20 years ago, the last time the House of Red Sleeves performed abroad was when they were invited to the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival in the Lank Temple. It was also at that festival that their youngest aunt died. Now, after more than 20 years, the House of Red Sleeves would appear in the Lank Temple again. How could Ning Ke not be vigilant? At this moment, Ning Ke suddenly felt that someone was approaching. He could not help but raise his eyebrows and look toward the direction of the big tree. He saw a black shadow sweeping over like lightning. With his eyesight, of course, he could clearly see that the black shadow was the big black horse. What made him vigilant was what had happened to make the big black horse so flustered. After all, except for the natural disaster more than 10 years ago, the public security of the Tang Empire had always been good. Ning Ke was not worried about his own safety. Even if there were rare bandits, he did not mind killing them and making a name for the academy. It did not matter even if they were cultivators. First, he defeated Guan Hai, then killed Dao Shi, blinded Lu Yiqing, and finally defeated Xiao. Someone's strength had been proven countless times. Although Wang Jinglu was not convinced, there was a consensus in the cultivation world that Ning Ke, Mr. 13 of the academy, was the real first person below the knowing destiny state. Moreover, with Sang Sang, the successor of the great divine priest of light, by his side, Ning Ke could even fight with a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. Of course, those grand cultivators who had entered the knowing destiny state must be very clear about his and Sang Sang's identity and background. Who would be so free to provoke the academy and the West Hill Divine Palace at the same time? The big black horse ran back to Ning Ke and Sang Sang, leaving a trail of smoke and dust. It kept panting and looked extremely panicked. Ning Ke looked solemnly at the smoke and dust. As the smoke and dust gradually dissipated, a bare-chested man holding a pitchfork rushed over, yelling and yelling. "Stop running, stupid horse. I'll beat you to death." Things were soon explained. It turned out that the big black horse was walking around and smelling the fragrance of the village in front of him. He could not control his mind and followed the smell to the window. He poked his head into the window and secretly ate the farmer's food. Then he was discovered by the farmer's owner and caused this chase. Ning Ke glared at the big black horse and thought to himself, "You are such a useless fool. I, your young master, feed you with yellow spirit fruits every day, and you still want to steal other people's food." Moreover, it was so frightened and panting that it wanted to die after being chased by a farmer with a pitchfork. The big black horse lowered his head in shame and looked extremely honest. He thought silently that it was his fault for not being able to stop himself from eating. If he did not look embarrassed, who knew how he would be punished by Ning Quebec? Ning Ke looked at the farmer and apologized with a bitter smile. The farmer supported himself with the pitchfork and held his waist. He was so tired that he was panting. He said, "This guy runs so damn fast. He is indeed a good horse. No wonder the bowl of porridge I cooked was swallowed in one gulp." Ning Ke felt even more embarrassed when he heard that the big black horse had secretly eaten a bowl of porridge. He said with a bitter smile, "He is used to eating and being lazy. He is not much better." The farmer heard this and shook his head disapprovingly. He said, "When I was in the cavalry camp, I did not see anything better than him. Even the general's mount is not as good as him." The Tang Empire implemented a 3-year recruitment system. In order to open up new territory, the army was not small. In addition, people worshipped martial arts, so many men had experience in the army. Ning Ke was not surprised when he heard this and knew that the farmer had retired from the army. He took out some money and handed it over. He said, "This is the money for the pot of porridge. The pot must be dirty, so it is counted as well." The farmer waved his hand carelessly and said, "I saw this handsome horse through the window and guessed that it had an owner. So I came to have a look. I don't need money for porridge." Ning Ke said with a smile, "If you don't need money for porridge, why did you come to have a look?" The farmer said matter-of-factly, "That's because you have a good attitude. If you are not polite, I will not only need money for porridge but also the wages for cooking porridge." This kind of matter-of-factness was common in the academy and among the Tangs. Ning Ke liked it very much. He said with a smile, "If so, I will not beat around the bush. The farmer looked at the black horse carriage and Sang Sang, who was wearing a handmaiden uniform. He guessed that they were resting here temporarily. He invited them. It is not convenient to talk here. Let's go to my house. Ning Ke was good at dealing with people and liked the farmer's temperament. But he was still the indifferent lad in his bones. He wanted to decline when he heard this. Unexpectedly, the farmer insisted and said, "Since we are going to travel a long distance, we should always have clean water. If you care, you can even give me money when you leave." Ning Ke still wanted to decline. The farmer looked at him and frowned. He said, "I can tell that you have been in the military camp. How can you be so wishy-washy?" Ning Ke looked at the farmer's resolute eyes and suddenly thought of the city of Wei that he had not seen for a long time. He thought of the soldiers in the city of Wei and the 3 sentences he left for General Ma before he left. "Then let's go," he said with a smile. "But I still want to drink." The farmer laughed and said, "Homemade grain wine. No matter how good it is, it will be enough. Have a good weekend." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 507. Catch them. Don't let them escape. Don't let them enter the mountain. These bandits are all King rats. Kill them all. Leave no captives. A fierce battle took place in the mountainous area at the border of the South Jin Kingdom. In the dusk, one could hear the whistling of arrows, the clashing of swords, and the desperate howls before death. There were less than 500 people on both sides of the battle. However, in the south of the mainland that had been peaceful for a long time, a battle that could leave dozens of corpses was certainly considered fierce. One side of the battle was the regular cavalry of the South Jin Kingdom. They were well trained and had the upper hand in combat. Moreover, they outnumbered the other side, so they quickly won the battle and began to chase after the bandits. The dozens of people who were being chased ran into the deep mountains in panic. From time to time, someone was shot in the back and fell into the bushes, howling in pain. Fortunately, it was late and the mountain path was dangerous. Finally, most of them managed to escape. The dark night shrouded the Sunset Mountain. Occasionally, the strange cries of crows could be heard from the depths of the dense forest. This mountain was part of the vast mountains of the West Hill Divine Kingdom, but it was deep within the territory of the South Jin Kingdom. Beside the bonfire, there were dozens of wounded people lying down. Some were shot by arrows, while others had their arms cut off by axes. The wounded people groaned in pain from time to time. Several men in black and gold armor sat in the warmest place closest to the bonfire. It was obvious that their status in the team was higher than the rest of the people. Their armors were decorated with dense golden patterns. It was obvious that they were extremely expensive and did not look like something a group of mountain bandits would have. Hearing the cries of their companions and the cries of crows in the forest, their faces grew paler and paler. They could not help but look at their silent leader, as if they wanted to get some comfort from him. The leader was a middle-aged man who also wore black armor. However, the golden patterns on his armor were even denser and faintly emitted a faint talisman aura. The middle-aged man was called Zimo. He used to be the cavalry commander of the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace. The men around the bonfire were like him. They used to be cavalry commanders of the Divine Hall. When Yi Hongyu killed the former great divine priest of judgment and ascended to the seat of heavenly black jade, these powerhouses who had made great contributions to the West Hill Divine Palace were cruelly destroyed of their cultivation and chased out of Peach Mountain. In the past few years, the papal cavalrymen under their command were the most powerful armed force of the judicial department of the Divine Hall. At least in the battle to hunt down the remnants of the devil's doctrine and the heretics, the bloody storm that the judicial department stirred up in the world and left a gloomy impression on the world were mostly recorded by them. In other words, the hands of these former commanders were stained with too much blood. They had no country to return to, and no one dared to take them in at the risk of angering the current divine priest of judgment. Yi Hongyu's punishment was very thorough. She stripped them of their power and cultivation. She didn't even let go of the wealth that they had plundered over the years. In the end, she only left them an old horse, 100 taels of silver, and all their retinue. They also had this black gold armor that once represented glory and majesty, but now it could not even bring back memories. It only brought shame and fear. They did not dare to return to the West Hill Divine Kingdom and had nowhere to go. Thus, they could only wander around the countries on the periphery of the West Hill. The taels of silver were soon spent. These commanders suddenly realized that they were like those lowly ants. They had to start thinking about their next meal and where to hide. These former commanders of the Divine Hall had their own skills to make a living. However, they were all extremely prideful people. How could they possibly ask them to do manual labor or something like that? The most troublesome thing was that their years in the Westhill Divine Palace had nurtured their habit of bossing people around. They were high and mighty and treated mortals like dogs. In the past, these habits and attitudes could be called majesty. Now that they had left the Westhill and become ordinary people, these had become obstacles in their lives. One day the former commander's team had an incident with a tyrant from the Kingdom of Song. One commander could no longer suppress his anger and ordered his retinue to cut off the tyrant's head. Then they broke into the tyrant's manor and robbed him of all the gold and silver. They stayed in a luxurious inn in the state capital and enjoyed the wine and women brought by the gold and silver. Suddenly, these former commanders who had been in a daze for several days found a way to survive without bowing and scraping. This method was simple and direct, and they could earn money very quickly. Although their cultivation had been destroyed and they were not even as strong as ordinary men, they were once the cavalry commanders of the Westhill Divine Palace. They had excellent strategies and commanding skills. The retinue that followed them were also very powerful. At least, they could not be compared to the guards in the secular society. So naturally they began to rob for a living. In a very short period of time, they successively raided several large clans in the countryside. During this process, everyone, including ZMO, remained silent and did not say anything. However, they knew very well that they, who had once sworn to protect light and justice, were falling into a bottomless black abyss. They still felt extremely humiliated and painful in their hearts. Fortunately, they now had a lot of gold and silver, so they could buy a lot of strong wine and women to numb themselves and live one day at a time. Unfortunately, this numbing accelerated the speed of their depravity. They became more and more violent during robberies. Some even started to rape and even kill. ZMO clearly realized that if this continued, there would definitely be problems. He tried his best to restrain them. However, the Divine Hall commanders who had begun to fall were like tigers released from their cages. They fell from the glorious Peach Mountain to the dirty dust. This stimulated them even more, and they could not be restrained at all. One day in midsummer, during a routine robbery at night, one of the commanders or retinue went crazy and beheaded an aristocrat who had already surrendered. The atmosphere of madness suddenly spread, and a tragic massacre took place in the manor. Accompanied by despairing cries, the aristocrat's entire family was killed. Robberies were naturally accompanied by death, and even rape was not rare. However, to kill a South Jean aristocrat's family, especially when the manor was not far from the capital of the South Jean Kingdom, they were in big trouble. This massacre did not alarm the powerhouses in the Sword Garret, but it was enough to alarm the imperial court of the South Jean Kingdom. During the investigation, the imperial court of the South Jean Kingdom was quite cautious when they found out that the murderers were wearing the armor of the cavalry commander of the Divine Hall. They sent letters to the Westhill Divine Palace, confirming that these people were sinners who had been expelled from the Peach Mountain and were no longer entitled to the protection of the Divine Hall. Thus, the imperial court of the South Jean Kingdom's caution at the beginning turned into anger. The South Jean Kingdom began to distribute arrest warrants, and offered a high reward to the informants. On these arrest warrants, these murderers were given a new name, Fallen Knights. The South Jean Kingdom was powerful, second only to the Tang Empire. Now that they were being treated so seriously, these Fallen Knights, no matter how sharp their eyes were or how good their commanders were all useless. They suddenly fell into a miserable situation and fled in all directions miserably. In the process of fleeing, retinue constantly died or ran away. Even these commanders were killed and several others were seriously injured. The troop that had left the Westhill with more than 100 people was now left with only a few dozen. Today they were almost completely annihilated in the encirclement outside the forest. Beside the bonfire, painful howls echoed incessantly. Their expressions were so desperate and gloomy. "Are we waiting for death here?" A strong and burly retinue stood up and walked to the bonfire. Looking at his companions who were mostly injured by arrows because they did not have armor, he said loudly, "Why don't we leave?" Retinue were equivalent to the servants of knights. They were most particular about loyalty. Once they betrayed their master, no one would take them in. However, this person said that he wanted to leave, which proved that the current situation was indeed at its most critical moment. A cavalry commander looked at this retinue with a gloomy expression. He roared angrily, Guan I've treated you well. If it weren't for me, how could you be in this situation today? How dare you betray me? Don't forget that your retinue is also on the arrest warrant. Where can you go? The retinue called Guan looked at his master and sneered, I've worked hard for you for so many years, but now I've fallen into this situation. How can you say that you've treated me well? As for the arrest warrant, except for your masters who have portraits, who would know such insignificant people like us? We've also robbed a lot of money these days. Let's go our separate ways. Who can find us if we hide? The commander said angrily, Don't forget that the money is with me. Guan looked at him disdainfully and said, I know you won't give the money to you. Knights like you won't let us off even if you die. However, don't forget that your cultivation has already been crippled by the divine priest of judgment. You're now a bunch of useless people. Do you still think it's the same as before? He looked at the retinue sitting around the bonfire and shouted, What are you still hesitating for? It's all because of our efforts that we've been able to rob so much money these days. These fellows have long been crippled. They can't even pick up a knife, so how can they be a match for us? The bonfire was not very strong and the forest further away was dark. It was impossible to see the expressions on the faces of the retinue, but it was possible to faintly see that they had all raised their heads. The commanders had once been high and mighty. They could bestow favors on their retinue and could also treat them like livestock. Tonight, their own retinue had actually rebelled. It was truly an unbearable humiliation. However, they had to admit that the current situation was extremely dangerous. If they handled things carelessly, they really could end up as corpses in the forest. At this moment, Guan's voice came to an abrupt halt. An extremely thin metal wire had unknowingly appeared on his neck and then suddenly tightened. The metal wire sank deep into his skin, and blood instantly gushed out. Guan's eyes widened in horror. His hands desperately dug at his neck, trying to dig out the metal wire. However, his actions were futile. The more he struggled, the deeper the metal wire sank. Chapter 508. Sizzle. Blood kept spurting out from Guan's neck and fell into the bonfire, giving off a very faint burnt smell. He collapsed on the ground and kicked his legs desperately. His boots kicked up clumps of mud, but he still could not stop the arrival of death, and could not stop his crotch from being wet with urine. Some retinues stood up in shock, but no one dared to move because of years of prestige. Zemo's face appeared in the dark. He used his hand, which was no longer strong but still stable, to take back the metal wire around Guan's neck and wipe off the remaining blood and flesh. He looked at the retinues with complicated expressions around the bonfire and said expressionlessly, Even a disabled person is not someone you can disrespect. Never underestimate the means we have learned in the judicial department. So if you don't want to die, you'd better stay calm. The retinues slowly sat back down and lowered their heads. No one knew what they were thinking or if they were really calm. The current crisis was temporarily resolved, but the commanders in front of the bonfire still looked extremely pale and gloomy, just like their mood at this time. Their desperate future was one of the reasons. The most important thing was that they still could not accept the reality. They used to be respected commanders of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. Even the generals of the South Jin Kingdom had to be respectful when they saw them. But now a random state army of the South Jin Kingdom dared to besiege them, and they were besieged so miserably that even their own retinues dared to betray them. Your Excellency, what should we do? A divine commander's voice trembled as he asked in despair. Zmo was the most experienced and powerful among these fallen cavalrymen of Divine Hall commanders. He was elected as the leader by the crowd. At this time they could only hope that he could come up with a solution. Zmo also did not know what to do. Where could these disabled and defeated soldiers go next? In fact, if it weren't for the punishment of the Divine Hall of Judgment, they could still be honored guests of all countries with their wisdom and strategies, as well as their ability to command on the battlefield. However, the Divine Hall of Judgment had cut off this possibility in advance. Every time he thought of this, his hatred and fear for the young divine priest grew stronger. Now the only thing he could rely on was himself. Only by restoring his strength and becoming strong again could he survive in this world. However, how could he become strong again when his cultivation was destroyed? The legendary elixir was just a legend after all. Zmo laughed at himself, then said in a low voice, Wash up and go to sleep. Hot water was nowhere to be found in the wilderness. While escaping, he could not care about enjoyment and could only sleep. Someone used soil to extinguish the bonfire, and the forest suddenly became pitch black. The thick clouds in the night sky covered all the stars, indicating that there might be a storm tomorrow. Some of them could not bear the exhaustion brought about by the escape and fell into a deep sleep. Some people could not sleep while imagining a hopeless future. Zihei looked at the dark night above his head and thought of the heavy rain tomorrow. His heart became heavier and heavier. He slowly clenched his trembling hands in extreme pain. He desperately and unwillingly thought, if I can regain my strength and become as strong as before, then I'm willing to give my life and everything to Netherworld King. In the silent night forest, there were still many people praying in despair. The sky was gloomy, but there was no rain, nor was there a rainstorm. However, there were clouds covering the sun, and the midsummer journey became much cooler. Since there was no sun, Sang Sang did not need to bask in the sun through the skylight of the horse carriage. Ning Kai naturally occupied that position. He stepped on the soft couch and stretched his upper body out of the skylight. Facing the wind blowing on the official road, he looked at the surrounding scenery and felt a sense of joy like a rich man. It had been a few days since they left Chang'an, and the black horse carriage had been following the diplomatic mission from afar. Although they had taken several county roads along the way, they were never worried about losing track of them due to the intelligence reports from the government, especially from the secret guards. It was the same even when they left the wilderness and entered the mountains in the south. A vast range of mountains appeared in the middle of the southern wilderness of the Tang Empire, dividing the territory into two regions. Perhaps the mountains had a certain influence on the climate. The same fertile soil in the south and north of the mountains produced very different crops. However, the black horse carriage was traveling in the mountains at this time, so Ning Kai and Sang Sang did not feel any difference. Compared with the familiar Min Mountain, the mountains in the south of the Tang Empire were not so high. However, because the rock was special and easily dissolved in water, there were landslides all year round, which made the peak strange and steep, extremely difficult to climb. Fortunately, there was a valley with dense green plants in the mountains, and the bottom of the valley was a natural passage. Otherwise, if they wanted to connect the north and the south, they might have to detour for more than 1,000 miles. Hundreds of years ago, the Tang Empire used a lot of manpower and material resources to widen the valley, and used talisman masters and tactical array masters to strengthen the two loose and dangerous cliffs of the valley. Then, they planted numerous trees with developed roots that could stabilize the rocks, and finally, the natural road in the valley became a very smooth official road. The black horse carriage traveled on the smooth official road and in the quiet valley. Ning Kai leaned out of the skylight and squinted to enjoy the scenery on both sides of the official road. Looking at the green and calm cliffs, he imagined the great transformation of nature by the Tang people hundreds of years ago. He thought of the talisman masters and tactical array masters with white hair because of the exhaustion of psyche power, and the soldiers and craftsmen who fell off the cliffs. He could not help but feel a little heroic. This heroic feeling had nothing to do with the skylight of the black horse carriage, and had nothing to do with the rich man. The Tang Empire had gone through so much difficulty to open up this mountain range and connect the central and southern territories. It was easy to imagine the strategic importance of this beautiful and verdant valley. Ning Kai could faintly see that there were extremely dangerous and steep mountain paths in the distance of the valley. Beside those mountain paths, there were extremely simple and crude guard stations a few miles away. Looking at the scale of the buildings in the guard stations, there were probably no more than 10 Tang soldiers stationed there. Thinking of the Tang soldiers stationed in the boring guard stations all year round, even someone as indifferent as Ning Kai could not help but feel a sense of admiration. Even the most verdant valley would be a little boring after looking at it for too long. Even the most heroic emotions would calm down after a long time, and even the most vicissitudes of history would become indifferent after experiencing it for a long time. Ning Kai sat back in the horse carriage and drank the herbal tea on the short table. When he calmed down, he picked up the brush and began to write. The purpose of going to the Lang Temple this time was to cure and save people. At the same time, he was also seeking Buddhism, so there should not be any danger. However, Ning Kai still maintained the habits of his youth. He was always ready to face a battle of life and death. Therefore, he was not writing a calligraphy section, but a talisman. The talismans he had written in the past 2 years had all been used on Xia Ho in the battle at the Winter Lake. He had to prepare more now. After some time, Ning Kai raised his head and put down his brush to rest. He rubbed his eyes and looked out of the window. He found that he was still in the valley and could not help but be a little surprised at how long the valley was. When he was writing the talisman, Sang Sang was tidying up the luggage beside him. She touched something and looked at it for a long time before she guessed what it was. She frowned and asked, "How did it become like this?" She held a small iron kettle in her hand. Looking at the deep lines on the outside of the kettle, it should be the same kind of thing as the small iron kettle that had exploded in the lotus field of the Snow Lake. However, it was much smaller and the shape was also very different. The most obvious difference was that there was an extra bayonet at the bottom of the small iron kettle. This is a whimsical idea of fourth brother. Who would have thought that sixth brother would really do it? Before we left the academy we tried it once. That day you and Xiaotang went to the back of the mountain to pick wisteria and cook meat, so you didn't see it. Ning Ke took the small iron kettle that looked a little delicate, it seemed more accurate to call it a small iron tube now, took out a talisman arrow from the iron box and inserted it into the bayonet at the bottom of the small iron tube. With a click, the arrow and the bayonet of the small iron tube were locked tightly. It was so tight that there was not a gap and it seemed to be unusually stable. Sang Sang reached out to try it and said, "It won't fall." Since he was a little older, Ning Ke's weapons had been handled by her personally. She was very experienced in sharpening knives and repairing bowstrings. If she said it wouldn't fall, then it wouldn't. Ning Ke took out the iron bow and assembled it. He put the talisman arrow in the small iron tube on the bowstring and calmly looked out of the window at the verdant canyon cliff trees that kept moving backward. His breathing gradually calmed down. The primordial 13 arrows were originally extremely terrifying weapons. Now that the people at the back of the mountain of the academy had forcibly added such a thing, it could be imagined that once it was shot, it would definitely cause a great commotion. This was not the back of the mountain of the academy, so Ning Ke could not really shoot it out. Otherwise, if he shot down the cliff that the previous generation of talisman masters and tactical array masters had painstakingly reinforced, even the headmaster of the academy would not spare him, let alone his majesty. After a moment, he put down the iron bow in his hand and said a few words. Sang Sang shook her head and took the iron arrow from his hand. She said, "Although it's not a big problem, the tail of the arrow has to be adjusted. The original talisman arrow could ignore wind resistance and even use the wind as a help. But now the talisman arrow has to be heavier. The most troublesome thing is that the area of the arrowhead facing the wind is too large. If you still want to ensure the accuracy, the shooting distance will definitely be greatly shortened." Ning Ke stuffed the bow and arrow into her arms and reached out to take a water radish. He started to chew it and said in a very irresponsible manner, "It's up to you." The black horse carriage finally drove out of the verdant canyon and came to the southernmost plain of the Tang Empire. The scenery on both sides of the state highway suddenly opened up, but the wind became a little gentler because there was more water. Ning Ke's attention was still on the vast mountains behind him. The moment he came out of the canyon, he suddenly thought that there were countless tactical arrays and talismans set up by the predecessors in the canyon. If a strong enemy were to invade from the south in the future, he only needed a great divine talisman master like Yen Sei to dispel these tactical arrays and talismans to block the canyon. Even if more than 10,000 cavalry came to attack, it would be impossible for them to attack the heart of the Tang Empire at a high speed. Soon he rejected his own idea. There were so many tactical arrays and talismans in the canyon, and it was impossible for one person to destroy them, even if his master was reborn. Unless the Empire had already tampered with these tactical arrays when they opened up the canyon. And even if the cliff collapsed and the road was blocked, the mountains would block the Tang Empire's reinforcements from the south at the same time. In the war, only a simple road was needed. The strong enemy who had the courage and strength to attack the Tang Empire must have enough tactical array masters and talisman masters to forcibly open a road for the cavalry to drive. Then the initiative of the battlefield might fall into the hands of these enemies. Therefore, his war deduction still needed a peerless powerhouse to guard the exit of the verdant canyon. That powerhouse must be strong enough to kill the Buddha, the devil, and the Taoist priest. Moreover, he could not rest, let alone sleep, eat or drink. He might even have to fight with the enemy's powerhouses for 3 days and 3 nights. Thinking of this, Ning Ke could not help laughing. He thought that there was no such a powerful person in the world. Even if there was, how could such a powerful person be so stupid to fall into a situation of certain death? I am looking forward to the future in advance. Green Mountain Verdant Canyon, see you in the next volume. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 509. Out of the verdant canyon they came to the real south of the Tang Empire. The fields were crisscrossed, the flowers and trees flourished, and the rivers flowed smoothly towards the south until they finally merged into the famous Great Swamp. Because of the mountains in the north and the verdant canyon, the Tang Empire did not deploy a large number of troops on the southern plains, even though the South Jin Kingdom was powerful and the navy was even more famous. As a result, this similarly rich and populous wilderness was less magnificent than the north, but more elegant and beautiful. The same was true for the houses on both sides of the road. Most of them had white walls and black eaves, high and low, and were faintly discernible between the green trees and water wheels. It did not appear monotonous, but instead had a different kind of quiet beauty. The black horse carriage continued south. The scenery along the way became quieter and quieter. There were more and more rivers and clear ponds and stone bridges. There were fewer farmlands but more quiet manners. They had arrived at Qinghe County. There was a big city in Qinghe County, known as the first city in the south of the Tang Empire. It was called Yangguan. Although this city was not strategically located, it was located in a very important transportation route. Therefore, although the imperial court did not station a large number of troops here, the defense of Yangguan was under the direct control of the Defender General of the state, Su Shi. Today the governor of Yangguan was surnamed Zhong. The first surname in the city was also Zhong. They basically controlled all the industries in the city, and the Zhong family was just the most inconspicuous among the big families in Qinghe County. These big families in the south of the Tang Empire owned vast tracts of land and countless wealth. What really made these families last for a long time was the importance they attached to education. These families paid the most attention to education and inheritance. With more than 1,000 years of history, no one knew how many famous people had come out. Not to mention the officials of the Tang Empire, the successive empresses from many years ago, and even several great divine priests of West Hill. Today many of the children of Qinghe County were serving as priests in the West Hill Divine Palace, or were hired as instructors by the Revelation Institute. The officials at all levels in Qinghe County were basically the descendants of the aristocratic families. However, due to the strict laws of the Tang Empire and the secret suppression of the imperial family for hundreds of years, the families in Qinghe County were relatively low-key. Moreover, they held office in their own hometown and always wanted to fight for face with Chang'an City. Therefore, the entire Qinghe County could be said to be politically clean and well-governed. It was very prosperous and lively. Coupled with the unique atmosphere of literati and a slightly comfortable religious atmosphere that could be accepted by the Tangs, it had always been one of the top 3 places to visit in the hearts of the Tangs. There were many shops and tourists in Yangguan City. There were a total of 132 lakes, big and small, so it was also known as the City of 100 Lakes. The most famous one was the Thin Lake in the south of the city. Although the lake was not big, it was close to the government office. More importantly, there were the best brothels and inns in the south by the lake, and the most gorgeous pleasure boats on the lake. The diplomatic corps headed for the Lank Temple rested in Yangguan City for a few days and stayed in a relatively quiet mansion on the east side of the Thin Lake. The mansion belonged to the Song family, one of the 7 families in Qinghe County. When they heard that the diplomatic corps was coming a month ago, the Song family did not hesitate to let them stay. It could be said that they had given the diplomatic corps enough face. There was a post office of the Tang Empire about 4 blocks away from the Thin Lake. A black horse carriage was parked outside the post office. Ning Ke looked at the scenery of the city through the window. He looked at the scholars on the street who bowed to each other and could not help but smile. He thought of his former classmate in the academy, Zhong Dajuan of Yangguan. The Zhong Dajuan that the Zhong family of Yangguan had vigorously cultivated, the Zhong Dajuan that used to be extremely hostile to him, the Zhong Dajuan that he had slapped countless times, the Zhong Dajuan that he had impersonated, the Zhong Dajuan that he had locked up for a long time, the Zhong Dajuan that he had not thought of for a long time. It's all in the past. Ning Ke recalled the days in the academy and could not help but feel that it was a lifetime ago. Now that he and Zhong Dajuan were people of 2 different worlds, he naturally had the right to feel this way. Because of the Zhong Dajuan that he hated, he naturally did not have a good impression of the Zhong family that controlled Yangguan. Incidentally, he also did not have a good impression of Yangguan City. Although he could not find any fault with the city from the horse carriage, he somewhat stubbornly believed that compared to Chang'an, this city was lacking something. As for what exactly it was lacking, he was too lazy to think about it. At this moment, Sang Sang walked out of the horse carriage. Ning Ke asked, "Have you sent the money?" Sang Sang nodded. Ning Ke said, "Are you sure that you used the imperial court documents?" Sang Sang said, "Of course I won't forget to save 5 taels of silver." Ning Ke said with satisfaction, "That's good." Ever since they left the city of Wei, or more precisely since the old brush pen shop opened and began to earn a lot of money, they would send some money to the city of Wei on time every month. Although the amount was not much, it was still something. According to Ning Ke, it was useless to send money to that shabby place. No matter how much money they sent, it would eventually end up in the gambling house and the wine shop. So there was no need to help those two guys. Ning Ke basically spent all his money on buying, renovating and repairing the house by the Yanming Lake. He even spent the next year's gambling house bonus. However, this trip to the Lank Temple should be counted as a business trip, so he did not hesitate to deceive Professor Huang He of the headmaster of the academy's words and swindled 3,000 taels of silver from the front yard. Then he threatened and lured Su Chongshan to get 1,000 taels of silver. His pocket was as full as yesterday. He and Sang Sang were still used to being thrifty. However, since they were rich, they naturally began to care about enjoyment. Although the carriage left by Master Yensei was good, it was a little shocking to live in a carriage in Yangguan City. So he chose the most luxurious inn by the thin lake and asked for the best room. He handed the big black horse to the inn's waiter and told him not to feed it dry food like bean buns. The waiter was shocked and speechless. He thought to himself that Ning Ke was indeed a rich man. His horse was so delicate that it could not even eat bean buns. Ning Ke was not afraid that the big black horse would get a stomachache, but he was afraid that it would get angry because the food was not good enough. One had to know that this fool was already used to eating fresh fruits, sealwort, ginseng and other nourishing things. How could he be interested in those bean buns? As for grass, he wouldn't even look at it. It was originally a foodie. This year it was led into the ditch by the old yellow bull. It began to pay attention to food like the headmaster of the academy and followed the rule that food was the god. If it really went crazy because of food, even Ning Ke might not be able to control it. After a simple wash in the room, Ning Ke took Sang Sang to the front yard of the inn and asked for a private room on the second floor. They leaned against the railing and looked at the thin lake. As expected, they ordered the most expensive dishes. The food in the south was really unique. Greasy food like smoked duck and meat with soy sauce could also be made light. A green sprout on the side of the plate was elegant. Light food like tofu and green vegetables were dyed with thick soy sauce. Together with a few pots of fruit wine, it was really pleasing to the eyes and the mouth. When Ning Ke and Sang Sang were eating happily, they suddenly heard some noises coming from the lake downstairs. Someone was talking about something that happened today, and the tone was quite angry and dissatisfied. Ning Ke listened quietly for a while and asked the manservant to call the innkeeper. He threw an ingot of silver to the innkeeper and found out what he wanted to know. Old grandfather Cui is celebrating his 100th birthday. It is such a big event. Even His Majesty wrote a congratulatory message and asked the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites to bring it. The West Hill Divine Palace also sent someone, Xian Zhilang, the general of the West. He is a general of the Tang Empire. He did not rest after entering Yangguan, but rushed to the Fuchin River Qing Garden to visit old grandfather. How dare the House of Red Sleeves be so rude? The innkeeper said. It was obvious that he was really unhappy. Ning Ke then knew that the day after tomorrow was the 100th birthday of old grandfather Cui of Qinghe Prefecture. Perhaps the Cui family thought that the House of Red Sleeves seldom came out of Chang'an, so they invited them to sing and dance at the birthday party. But it seemed that something went wrong. The families in Qinghe Prefecture had been around for thousands of years, even longer than the Tang Empire. They had always been respected by the world. Except for the Zhong family, the other families did not live in Yangguan, but in the manors by the Fuchin River. There were many famous gardens on both sides of the Fuchin River, which silently proved the background and power of these families. It was universally acknowledged that the Cui family in Riyang was the leader of the families in Qinghe Prefecture. The Cui family originated from Riyang State. 1,000 years ago, when the Tang Empire was founded, the Cui family disregarded the opposition of other families and firmly supported Chang'an. They agreed to let Qinghe Prefecture be incorporated into the Tang Empire. Although it was mostly due to the terrible pressure of Emperor Taizu of the Tang Empire, the Cui family's insistence was proved to be extremely wise. The families in Qinghe Prefecture not only survived, but also won the favor of Emperor Taizu and fought for a lot of benefits. The other so-called families that dared to ignore Emperor Taizu all ended up with a tragic ending. In the subsequent history, the Cui family contributed a total of 5 empresses to the Tang Empire. In other words, His Majesty in the Palace of Chang, and must also have the blood of the Cui family. In addition, what was even more awe-inspiring was that the Cui family contributed 2 great divine priests to the West Hill Divine Palace. Today's Chui family was still powerful and unattainable. Old great-grandfather Chui, who was about to live for 100 years, had once been the prime minister. Under the deliberate suppression of the royal family and the civil and military officials, an official from the families in Qinghe Prefecture could actually become the first among the civil officials. This was the first time in nearly 300 years. Just from this alone, one could imagine how important the old great-grandfather Chui was. Many years ago, the old great-grandfather Chui retired from the position of prime minister. Later, his second son was an assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel. Now he had resigned and spent his days leisurely in the manor of Fuqian River. The one who remained in the imperial court of Chang, and was the eldest grandson of the third generation of the Chui family. He had also become the junior minister of the Supreme Court. Such a person naturally deserved the emperor's personal congratulation and the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights to come in person for his 100th birthday. Even many officials in the imperial court guessed that if it was not for the implementation of the national policy, perhaps the emperor would have rewarded him more heavily. Now the House of Red Sleeves might have angered such a super family. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 510. The legendary families of Qinghe County were extremely wealthy and powerful. They had stood for thousands of years in the long river of history. However, they were literate and did not have the face of a nouveau riche or the stench of money. They were truly respectable. If Ning Ke had heard about these powerful families a few years ago, he would have been extremely excited or yearning for the wealth and power of the families in Qinghe County. However, he did not even bother to raise his eyebrows when he heard about these because he really could not get excited. Although he had not entered the realm where wealth was nothing to him, the word wealth was really no different from the floating clouds between the cliffs in the back of the mountain. The back of the mountain of the academy was an unknown place. Although it was said that the two worlds were connected and he wanted to represent the academy to enter the human realm, in fact he was getting further and further away from the secular world. No matter how great a family was, it was still great in the mortal world. How could it be qualified for people outside the mortal world to look down on it? It was just that he did not know when this person outside the mortal world would become a sublime person outside the mortal world. He did not need to care about the families in Qinghe County, but he had to care about the House of Red Sleeves. He looked at the golden thin lake outside the fence and fell into deep thought. The House of Red Sleeves had a strong background and Mistress Jian was on good terms with the Empress. However, it was just a song and dance troupe and also a brothel business. Although the Tang Empire was open and people did not feel that it was lowly, it was not very glorious either. Then why did those girls dare to fight with the families in Qinghe County? More importantly, the House of Red Sleeves had no reason to offend these powerful families in the south. According to the itinerary, even if they danced and danced at Old Master Chui's birthday banquet, they would not have a problem in time. This does not make sense. Ning Ke said, the House of Red Sleeves is just a song and dance troupe. Where did they get the courage? You're right, sir. The shopkeeper sighed and said, although Yangguan is not as good as Chang'an and Qinghe County is just a part of the Tang Empire, we are not an ordinary countryside. Old Master Chui's birthday banquet is not a place that anyone can go to. They dared to make excuses when I asked them to dance. The ignorance and disrespect of these girls is really unbearable. Ning Ke smiled and waved his hand to signal the shopkeeper to leave. After a while, the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He looked at Thin Lake outside the fence and said expressionlessly, so they are deliberately making things difficult. The Nikhang song was a dance performed by the House of Red Sleeves during the enthronement ceremony of the new monarch of South Jin Kingdom more than 30 years ago. It was said that when the Nikhang song danced, no audience dared to blink, and no musicians dared to look at the dancers. When the dance reached its climax, it could even be seen that flowers were falling from the sky. No matter how exaggerated the rumor was, Ning Ke did not believe it. He had seen many dances in the House of Red Sleeves, but he had never seen Nikhang. It was not that the girls in the House of Red Sleeves were keeping secrets from him, but that the dance required 36 dancers to dance at the same time, and the building did not have such a large space. Over the years, the House of Red Sleeves had not performed the Nikhang song in other places except for a few times in Chang'an. No one knew that the House of Red Sleeves could no longer perform the Nikhang song. The Nikhang song had high requirements for the leading goddess. Lu Shui, the only one who was able to lead the dance in the past 5 years, had married into a good family. The new girl trained by Mistress Jian was not as good as Lu Shui. She could dance 90% of the charm of the Huchuan dance, but she could not master the Nikhang song. The House of Red Sleeves was still the House of Red Sleeves even though they could not dance the Nikhang song. They were invited to the Lank Temple this time to perform a dance called the Heavenly Maiden Scattering Flowers. It was said to be equally beautiful. However, it was still a terrible thing that their most famous dance might be lost, so it became a secret. The House of Red Sleeves had a close relationship with the Academy, and even more so with Ning Quebec. If he wanted to, he could even know each girl's menstrual cycle. For him, the House of Red Sleeves could not have any secrets. He knew that the House of Red Sleeves could not perform the Nikhang song, so he was sure that the aristocratic families in Qinghe County insisted that the House of Red Sleeves perform the Nikhang song because they knew about it. But why would the aristocratic families in Qinghe County make things so difficult for the House of Red Sleeves? Ning Ke could not figure it out no matter how hard he thought about it. He hurriedly finished his meal and left the inn with Sang Sang. They returned to the post office and looked at the black signboard of the post office. He found the mark he needed and followed the mark on the street of Yangguan to an inconspicuous grocery store. In the grocery store, the shopkeeper bowed slightly and said politely, "What can I do for you, sir?" Ning Ke said directly, "This is the secret guard's place, right?" Hearing this, the shopkeeper's expression suddenly changed. He subconsciously wanted to take out a knife from his waist and stab the young man in front of him to death. But he felt that something was wrong, so he tentatively said, "Gale? Rainstorm? I don't remember." Who has the patience to remember so many of your secret codes? Ning Ke said as he took out an waist token from his belt and threw it to the shopkeeper. Before the battle with Xiahou, he had returned the waist tokens of the secret guard and the visiting professor of the Imperial Center Administration to His Majesty in the palace. His intention was naturally simple. He just didn't want His Majesty to be in a dilemma. However, to his surprise, His Majesty returned the 2 waist tokens a few days after he killed Xiahou. And the waist token of the secret guard directly became the head of the secret guard. Of course, this was an honorary title. The shopkeeper took the waist tag and confirmed that it was one of his people. He couldn't help but feel angry. He thought to himself, which colleague trained this newbie? Why is he acting like an idiot? Barging into the shop and asking if it's a secret guard spot? If everyone does this, then what's the point of the secret guard? Luckily I'm careful. Wait, this waist token was a little strange. The shopkeeper looked at the obviously different patterns on the waist token and hurriedly flipped through the words on the back. His expression suddenly became strange, and he hurriedly welcomed Ning Ke into the backyard. After entering the backyard, he hurriedly knelt in front of Ning Ke, raised the waist token with both hands, and said in a trembling voice, "Your humble servant pays his respects to the head of the Imperial Center. I have been secretly displeased before, and I hope your excellency can forgive me." There had never been a rule of kneeling in the Tang officialdom, unless it was a very formal ceremony. When ministers entered the palace and met His Majesty, they just casually cupped their hands as a greeting. However, the secret guard was different after all, and the most important thing was that this secret guard was too frightened by the identity represented by the waist token. The current head of the bodyguard was Su Chongshan, a genuine official close to the emperor. Although the shopkeeper was very sure that Ning Ke was not Su Chongshan, he knew that the waist token could not be faked. It meant that Ning Ke was the superior of his superior's superior. Get up. Ning Ke looked at the shopkeeper with a slightly strange expression. He thought that since he was secretly displeased, why did he say it out? Could it be that all the secret guards of His Majesty were gentlemen who would not bully the secret room? Then how could he secretly? He shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. He said, "I came to ask about the matter between the Chui family and the House of Red Sleeves." The shopkeeper stood up with a respectful expression. He did not answer but asked in accordance with the rules, "May I know your excellency's name?" Ning Quebec. Hearing this name, the shopkeeper suddenly had the urge to kneel again. He used a lot of strength to stand up straight and said in a trembling voice, "The 4th steward of the Chui family visited the House of Red Sleeves in the morning and left in anger." It was a very simple answer without any speculation, but it explained a lot of problems. Ning Ke nodded with appreciation and continued, "I don't understand why the Chui family would make things difficult for the House of Red Sleeves. This is not in line with the image created by the families in Qinghe Prefecture, and it is also not in line with their style of doing things. If the House of Red Sleeves is just a singing and dancing troupe without any background, This kind of bullying is meaningless and will only damage their reputation. If they know the background of the House of Red Sleeves, why would they dare to do this? Not to mention the former Prime Minister and the centenarian grandfather, they are all *T in front of His Majesty. The shopkeeper said, the Chui family must know that the background of the House of Red Sleeves is the Empress. But the Qinghe Prefecture has been helping His Highness these years. In my opinion, are they trying to suppress the power of the Empress? Ning Ke was slightly stunned and said, they are indeed not ordinary aristocratic families. They actually dare to interfere in this kind of thing and even dare to choose a side in advance. Then he looked at the shopkeeper and said with a smile, you are really brave to speak frankly about the matters in the palace. The shopkeeper understood the appreciation in Ning Ke's eyes and finally felt relieved. He said respectfully, since Mr. 13 is asking, I naturally dare not hide anything. Ning Ke was slightly surprised and asked, you know me? The shopkeeper said seriously, who hasn't heard of your name nowadays? You don't have to try to please me. I am just an honorary supervisor and I don't usually manage things. Ning Ke said, I just don't understand why the Chui family would dare to do this. Don't they know the relationship between the House of Red Sleeves and me? The shopkeeper said, previously you asked why the aristocratic families in Qinghe Prefecture dared to provoke the Empress by making things difficult for the House of Red Sleeves. I am afraid that a large part of the reason is that they guess that you are in the city. Ning Ke asked confusedly, how does it have anything to do with me? The shopkeeper looked as if he had seen a god. Sir? General Xiahou died in your hands. Ning Ke said, so what? The shopkeeper repeated helplessly, because General Xiahou, the Empress' greatest helper, was killed by you. You represent the Academy and support Her Highness, so Qinghe Prefecture naturally wants to express their position. Upon hearing this, Ning Ke thought for a long time. Then he shook his head and said, the headmaster said that I am writing my own story. I don't like this kind of boring plot, so I have to solve it as soon as possible. The most important question is, when did the families in Qinghe Prefecture start to do such boring things? He asked the shopkeeper to bring a brush, ink, paper and inkstone, and wrote a simple letter. Send this letter to Old Master Chui. I really want to know whether these aristocratic families want to use the Academy's power to help Li Yu, or to do something else with Li Yu's power. If they really have other ideas, I can't guarantee what I will think of them. Have a good weekend, everyone. I'm going to fly again. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.